Doctor. Good morning, esteemed colleagues, distinguished participants here in Abidjan, and to those joining us virtually. It is a great honor to welcome you to the 2024 AfDB Development Evaluation Week, proudly hosted by the Independent Development Evaluation in collaboration with key departments of the African Development Bank Group. This event brings together a diverse community of experts, policymakers, and stakeholders from across the continent to engage in meaningful discussions on the pivotal role of development evaluation in shaping Africa's growth and transformation. Today marks the second session of this important week, titled Accelerating Economic Diversification, Transformative Findings and Lessons from Development Assistance Initiatives. The overarching theme of this year's event, Navigating Rough Seas Towards a Brighter Horizon, brightly captures the journey we are all undertaking. Today and together, we are confronting some of Africa's most pressing challenges, from economic instability to climate change to social inequalities, united by our shared goal of fostering inclusive and sustainable development. So when discussing economic diversification, several key concepts come to my mind. Broadening the economic base, mitigating risks, fostering innovation and competitiveness, promoting sustainable growth, creating jobs, enhancing resilience to external shocks, and advancing regional development. In the context of Africa's development, the significance of economic diversification has never been clearer, especially in the aftermath of global disruptions like the COVID-19 pandemic. So today's session presents a timely opportunity to explore successful strategies, reflect on lessons from past initiatives, and discuss how we can navigate the current challenges to unlock Africa's massive, and I say massive, economic potential and drive long-term transformative growth. So here's what you can expect from today's session. We'll begin with an opening address from the African Development Institute, offering insights into the current landscape of economic diversification in Africa. This will be followed by an engaging panel discussion with our distinguished experts, who will share the perspective and insights on the critical issues before us. Finally, we'll open the floor for an interactive Q&A session, giving you the opportunity to ask questions and engage directly with the panelists. Our goal today is not just to reflect on past successes, but also to ignite fresh ideas, inspire innovative approaches, and drive actionable solutions that can shape the future of economic diversification across the continent. I encourage each of you to actively participate throughout the session. The insights we generate together will be instrumental in shaping the next chapter of Africa's development story. So once again, thank you for your presence and enthusiasm. I look forward to a fruitful and engaging session ahead. But before we dive into the program, I'd like to offer a quick reminder. This is a hybrid event with participants joining us both here in the room and online. So to ensure smooth and engaging participation or experience for everyone, let's go over some few housekeeping rules. So first, please make sure your mics are muted or off for those in the room. We have interpretation in English and French. For those online, please select the language of your preference by clicking on the globe icon. For those in the room, please use the headset and select the channel that fits your language preference. During the Q&A, you have two options. You can raise your hand and the moderator will select the participant accordingly. Or you can type your question or comment in the Q&A or chat box for those of you online. Finally, we are recording today's event, so you will receive a link to the recording via email within a few days. To set the stage for today's session, it is my pleasure to invite my esteemed colleague, Eric, to speak on the current landscape of economic diversification in Africa. Dr. Eric Ongulie has nearly 20 years of postdoctoral experience across international development, the private and public sectors, and academia. He is the director of the African Development Institute at the African Development Bank Group, where he leads efforts to integrate capacity development into the bank's operations and supports growth in 54 regional member countries. He previously managed the Policy Management Division, led capacity development in macroeconomics, and advised the chief economist at the bank. He has also served as a technical advisor to Nigeria's Minister of Budget. He has also been a country economist at the African Development Bank and held research roles at institutions like UNU-WIDER, UNCTAD, WTO, and the University of Calabar. Welcome, Eric.
Nick, you are on mute, please. You are on mute, sir. Mr. Eric, can you hear us? You are muted.
Okay. Thank you very much. I couldn't see the unmute button. Thank you very much, Jane, for that very wonderful introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're connected. It is indeed my pleasure to be here this morning. I want to especially thank the Independent Development Evaluation Unit of the bank for inviting me to participate in this very, very important conversation, especially as it centers around issues of economic diversification. because this is one of the greatest challenges most African countries face today. And it is very important, therefore, that we take a look at this theme and digest it. I mean, dissect it, digest it, and so on and so forth. So thank you once again for the opportunity. So for my presentation, this is, I know I have very limited time, so I'll just rush through quickly, and then maybe if there's any issue, I can always come back to take some of them. But this is what I hope to cover in the process of this conversation. Take a look at why the economic diversification matters for Africa. Then what is the state of economic diversification? What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? And what are the strategies that we could take a look at? And then I'll conclude by looking at what is the role of the bank? What is the bank really doing to support its member countries, regional member countries, to achieve economic diversification? Now, before we go into, I start with the discussion proper, looking at what are those key concepts. I think it's important we look at the concept itself of economic diversification. And the concept can be summarized in the picture you're seeing here. This is the concept of don't keep all your eggs in one basket. And the reason, as you can see here, is if the basket gets broken or falls, the whole egg breaks, all of them. So the point, therefore, is how do you ensure that you keep your eggs in different baskets so that if one basket falls, not all your eggs get broken? So that is the concept that summarizes the issue of economic diversification. So what that means is for an economy, for a country, is that you should not invest in things that do not move in the same direction at the same time or at the same pace. Then it also means that you also then need to reduce your chances. You reduce your chances of losing all of them, all the money. Because if all the investment are moving in similar direction, if anything happens to them, what happens? The whole economy goes down. So it's important, therefore, that country reduce that risk by ensuring that they have as many portfolio of investment, of productivity, of different economic activities as much as possible, so that they don't lose all of them when there is a shock, which are prone to come from time to time, that countries face. So economic diversification, therefore, can simply be defined as the increasingly equal distribution of production, employment, revenues, or exports across products, across sectors, and also across markets. So you're looking at employment, you're looking at your production, you're looking at your revenues and exports, but that cut across not just only one country, for example, not only one sector, but you're diversifying, you're spreading out, as it were, across these different products, different sectors, and also different markets. So what I suggest, therefore, is that the more goods and services that a country produces, the more it will be able to sell to different markets, the more opportunity it has to export these goods and services to different markets and also to different countries. And the more, if the country is doing that, the more revenues the country is sure to have from those different sources. So if an economy, for example, is not doing well, then the country can focus on another economy in terms of exports as sources of revenue for exports. And for the product it produces also, if a country has a shock in a particular sector, in a particular product it exports, it can shift to another one. But if all it has is only one commodity or just two, or the economy is not diversified, then it becomes a very big challenge. So what this summarizes is that economic diversification is a key element of economic development in any country. And the reason is because it helps the country to move in a way that enables it to be able to have a trade structure that is more balanced, and also productivity and production of goods and services that are also more balanced. So when a country lacks economic diversification, it is usually the case that the country will face economic shocks. So if shocks come and impact on those single or just few commodities or sectors of production, then the economy crumbles. And this is one of the reasons many African countries today are in debt, because the one single or few sectors they're engaging in is in trouble. And once that happens, then the entire economy actually goes down. So it's important, therefore, that countries must do as much as they could. And we all recall recently during the COVID-19, for countries, for example, that rely on tourism, we know how much the economies were affected. For countries that also rely on, say, crude oil, we also saw, because there was economic activities were low, and so there were no demand for crude oil. We also saw how those economies fared. So this is the concept of economic diversification that helps us to understand the discussion that we want to have. So now, with that understanding, then why then does economic diversification matter? You'll notice that from the concept I just discussed, we can already see why it is important, because of the effect it could have on the economy, on jobs, on production, on exports, on revenues, and so on and so forth. But then, in discussing why it matters, we can just use these 4 different areas of diversification to illustrate that: domestic production, trade, government revenue, and of course, what will happen when a country lacks economic diversification. So if you look in terms of these 3 important areas, sectors, where countries need to ensure diversification, you can already see the benefits that it gives to the countries. For example, when you diversify your trade, it helps you to attract capital. It helps you to attract investment. It also boosts the opportunity to create jobs for youth, for women, and also for the most vulnerable groups in the society. Now, what happens when a country lacks economic diversification? Well, again, like we said earlier, structural transformation is absolutely important. If a country is not structurally transformed, then it means it's static. And that indicates that there's no progress. That indicates that achievements are not being made in all these different areas that we've talked about: revenue generation, job creation, and so on and so forth. But the most important of it is the vulnerability that such economies face. And this vulnerability implies that if anything happens to that particular sector, then the entire economy collapses. It's like the adage of when somebody is coughing, the other one is catching cold already, because they already know what the impact will be on the economy. So it's important, therefore, and very imperative that countries should endeavor, if they want to reduce the risks that we see here that are associated with lack of economic diversification, they need to do everything possible to ensure that they're diversified. And it's interesting, as we'll talk very briefly later, the fact that the bank is at the forefront of helping countries within the continent to ensure that they achieve economic diversification. So now that we know all of this, what then is the condition? What is the state of economic diversification in Africa today? Well, from this slide, there are 2 important points that we need to take away. Number one is that the continent, Africa, lags behind all other regions, whether developed or developing, when it comes to economic diversification. If you look at this chart, you don't need to look too far to locate Africa. It is the red one that is at the lowest bottom. So that's one takeaway in terms of the state of economic diversification in the continent. The continent is at the lowest possible level when compared with other regions of the world. Now, the second point to also note here is that the economic diversification we have seen in Africa over the years, in fact, for decades, for almost 30 years now, has not changed much. And you can see the shape, you can see the trend that it's been relatively flat in terms of improvement. So these are two important points that we need to bear in mind. And this data comes from the 2024 Global Economic Diversification Index that show the progress that has been made. In fact, the continent has just 90.5 points on economic diversification, while other countries, developing countries, peer countries like Latin America and the Caribbean have 96.8, and South Asia has 110 points when it comes to economic diversification. So that's one important message to take away from here in terms of the state of economic diversification in Africa. Now, when we now take a closer look at how countries perform vis-a-vis the other countries globally and also within the continent, you see here that African countries, they account for almost 2/3 of the lowest 20 ranked nations and 7 of the 10 least developed economies, least diversified economies in the world. If you look at the chart to your right, those ones in red color bars are African countries, and you can see how much they dominate this list, the least 20, the least diversified economies on the continent. They are actually dominating, apart from like 4 countries down there, they are basically almost all of them are African countries. And now if you look at the chart to your left too, you will also see how the continent has also performed. 12 of the 20 least diversified countries are African, and also the number of the African economies or countries, they are among the lowest, which means therefore that Africa is also not doing too well. If you look, for example, at those countries that are ranked there, between 2000 and 2022, there's an increase in the number of African countries that are least diversified from 45% to 65%. And that is really concerning, just over 22 years. So that tells us, therefore, the importance of ensuring that the continent, the countries focus as much as possible on improving economic diversification. Now, still on the state of economic diversification, now looking closer within the continent, we notice here that there are 3 countries that are leading in terms of the most economically diversified countries on the continent. And they're South Africa, number 1, Tunisia, number 2, and Morocco, number 3. These are the top countries. And if you look at the bottom, you can see Angola, Niger, and Ethiopia. So this is how the countries rank. This is how they stand as at today. And when I say today, I mean the most recent data that is available on this particular index. So we already know who is on top. We also can see those who are below. Now, another point to note, however, when it comes to economic diversification in Africa, is the comparison between revenue diversification and trade and production diversification. What you notice here is that Africa is doing better on revenue diversification when compared to production and trade diversification, because on revenue diversification, the continent scores 98.8%, while for production, for trade and production, it's scored 87.7 and 85 points respectively. So this helps us to see the point we're making here is not as if the continent is doing well when it comes to revenue diversification, but this is in comparison with the other 2 measures of diversification. So, but like we had said earlier, the continent continues to remain at the lowest bottom when it comes to other regions of the world in their performance on economic diversification. Let's move further now to what are the success stories? Again, it's not all gloomy, as we have indicated here. We've had very good cases of in some countries where we've had good success stories, of economic diversification. we have Mauritius, we have Kenya, we have Ethiopia, and Rwanda. So the point, even though we saw earlier that Ethiopia was on a lower end when it comes to economic diversification, but they're doing relatively well in some aspects. For example, in manufacturing output, we see a growth that moved from 9.6% in 2005 to, by about 15% between 2005 to 2010, So this is an indication that countries are really not static. Some efforts are being made, some progress is being made. And Mauritius is another very typical example in terms of they're moving away from that single economy of sugar at a point in time, now going into more of manufacturing and also into very sophisticated services. Now, I'm wary of my time. Let's talk briefly about the barriers, the potentials, and the strategies that we need to focus on. One thing I would not have time to mention, especially in the previous discussion, is the variation that we see across countries, depending on whether they are oil dependent, whether they are other resource dependent, whether they are fragile states, and so on and so forth. When you beam such light to the continent, at that deeper dive level, you see those, various variations across the continent. But one thing that I need to mention is the fact that we tend to see that countries that are oil dependent, they tend to be less economically diversified. And that's why you see Angola down there, and you also see Nigeria, down there. So meaning therefore that one of the challenges, one of the barriers to economic diversification on the continent is resource dependence. So for countries that are highly resource dependent, you tend to see that there is a low level of economic diversification in these economies. Then we also have issues about policy. Some of the policies that these countries initiate, the policy environment, the economic environment, the legal framework, some of them are so inconsistent and they do not really align. In fact, some countries don't even have diversification strategy, which are some of the things that are required to ensure consistency, to strengthen institutions that are weak. Then infrastructure, as we know, to diversify the economy, for example, into maybe sophisticated services like we highlighted in the case of Mauritius, you need very functional infrastructure. Yet we have some economies in Africa where power, electricity generation is at very low level. You have up to like 60, 70, even 80% of the population not having access to power. Road infrastructure is also another challenge. So how do you diversify when you do not have the basic infrastructure that is required for you to thrive? Capital is also an issue, and some of these is related to the risks that are associated with African countries. A lot of foreign investors have some associated risk index that they, attach to African countries because they feel it's a very risky environment to invest in. Again, linking back to the policy inconsistencies. Government of some countries will wake up one day and confiscate maybe some of the capital, or maybe the countries, because of government policies, are not just able to repatriate the return on their investment. And as we do know, most investors are more interested in that ability to get their, profit out, or even the capital out when they are ready, not being stuck in some of these economies. And we've seen a number of even foreign investors closing shops in some countries because of this policy inconsistency. So that tend to limit access to capital that is required for these countries to actually be able to diversify the economy. Now, in terms of potential, the potentials in African countries are great. We know how many resources, most of this, in fact, there's no African countries you can point to that does not have one form of resources or the other. And there are even some of them that have so much of them. In terms of arable land, you're talking about the minerals, you're talking about so many other things. So this is a potential that the countries have to attract investment that can, start with those natural resources or those sectors and begin to branch out, begin to expand into several other services. Population is also in our favor. We have a lot, very high population and high growth population, youth dominated population. These are consuming, these are consuming, potential, market for investment in different activities. Whether you're looking at manufacturing, whether you're looking at, high yielding services and so on and so forth. So this is another very important potential. And the AfCFTA is another opportunity for the continent, for the individual countries to integrate and be able to expand their economies in such a way that it attracts investment, it attracts foreign manufacturing firms, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of strategies that we can adopt, we have just 6 of them that are listed there. One of them, like I said earlier, is the importance of having diversification strategy or industrialization strategy. Again, we have a number of countries, African countries, that do not have that template, that blueprint that can help them to achieve diversification. So it's important that countries think about that seriously to ensure that they have a strategy in place that can help them to industrialize and to diversify their economies. Secondly, in attracting foreign direct investment, many countries tend to focus on their areas of strength. Like we said earlier, for countries that are resource rich, they may want to focus on that particular resource. Why not think about diversification adding value to those commodities? Instead of just crude oil exploration and exploitation and export in that crude form, why not think about brokering and ensuring there's a policy where you can have refineries sited in those countries for them to be able to produce or to be able to refine the crude and have the different petroleum products that come out of it. Gas is there, the PMS is there, gas oil is there, diesel, and so on and so forth. I think that should be a very important way to focus on. And like we said earlier, the business environment is absolutely important. Investors will not come and put their money in a country where they are not sure that they will be able to take their money out when they are ready to do so. They will also not put their economy in a country where they are not sure that exchange rate will just, swallow up the entire capital that they bring into the economy. And one more thing I just want to mention is the importance of ensuring that we invest in capacity development, especially as it comes to science, technology, innovation, and so on and so forth. I don't know if my time is up. I know it must almost be up, if not already up. So my concluding thought is just to take a look at this very important role that the bank is playing. So we're not just talking about economic diversification. It's interesting to see that the bank itself is taking active action. I mean, it's taking specific action that will help countries to diversify. And so some of us who are in the bank were very familiar with this slide. These are the 5 important areas that the bank is focusing when it comes to promoting economic diversification. And it's also important to quickly emphasize that our 10-year strategy that has just taken off is one very important instrument that the bank is using to support its regional member countries to diversify. Thank you very much again, Jane. I believe I would have gone past my time, but my apologies, and thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Eric. You are just right on time. I think the participants in the room will agree with me. From now on, Eric, we are going to call you Professor Eric, because you are able to break it down so eloquently, and I'm a visual person myself. So that slide you showed with the broken eggs and the basket, that will stay for me forever when I think about economic diversification. But you are able to, break it down in terms of, looking at why diversification matters at the end of the day. The state that we are currently in, you highlighted the good success stories from the continent, even though you had made comparison with other countries from the other regions. And also you ended up on, on a candid note, looking at the barriers, but at the same time, highlighting the potential that we have and the strategies that we still have time to employ to change that story. So thank you so much because you've set the scene so well for our panel discussion. So thank you, Eric. I hope you can stay until when we have the Q&A session, if you have the time, because I'm sure our audience or participants will have plenty of questions for you. I have questions, but I'll have a bilateral conversation with you on this, maybe around a water cooler or something, or coffee. So thank you. So we move on with the program. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite another esteemed colleague of mine, Aissa Touressa, to help us moderate this panel discussion. Aissa Touressa is an economist with over 27 years of experience as a country manager for the African Development Bank in Rwanda. She oversees $1.5 billion US portfolio across 26 projects. Aissa has strengthened relations between the bank and the government of Rwanda, leading her appointment to as co-chair of the Development Partners Group. Before joining AfDB in 2021, she worked with institutions such as IFAD, WaterAid, Oxfam America. She holds multiple degrees in economics and project financing engineering. Welcome, Aissa. Over to you.
Merci Jane pour la présentation. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, vous m'entendez?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Donc je disais merci beaucoup Jane pour la présentation. Bonjour chers panélistes, chers collègues et participants à la deuxième session de la semaine de l'évaluation qui porte, comme l'a dit Eric, sur un sujet fondamental et vital pour la trajectoire socio-économique du continent, car il s'agit de comment accélérer la diversification économique, les constatations transformatrices et les enseignements tirés des initiatives d'aide au développement. Avant de vous présenter le panel, je voudrais rebondir rapidement, si tant est que c'est possible, sur la présentation de Eric, qui est à la fois très informative et un peu déprimante, j'avoue, et très alarmante. Mais je crois que c'est avec des constats comme ça et avec des solutions qu'on peut, comme on dit en anglais, push the needle, parce que le continent en a besoin. Il a abordé plusieurs prismes, Jane est revenue là-dessus, mais je pense que ce qui me paraît être essentiel dans ce qu'il a dit, c'est les politiques et les stratégies qui doivent être mises en place pour que cette diversification économique puisse se faire, au niveau notamment des cadres incitatifs, des investissements qu'il faut faire, des réformes, il en a parlé, les politiques efficaces pour soutenir l'ajustement et la réaffectation des ressources et les différentes interventions gouvernementales pour réajuster. Et tout ça ne peut se faire que quand on a une stratégie de diversification, et il l'a encore dit, beaucoup de pays malheureusement à présent ne l'ont pas. Et ce n'est pas par hasard qu'on a le Rwanda dans la liste des 4, malheureusement 4 sur 54 pays, c'est vraiment très très peu. Pourquoi un petit pays comme ça, enclavé, avec pas de ressources, a pu faire ce qu'il a fait avec l'histoire qu'on connaît? C'est parce que justement, le cadre incitatif y est, la gouvernance y est, la redevabilité y est, et ils travaillent sur leur point faible qui est sur le capital humain. Donc, je pense que c'est un modèle, c'est une leçon pour tout le continent. Sans plus tarder, je vais donc vous présenter le panel. Vous nous excuserez d'avance, c'est un panel purement masculin. Il y a une raison à cela. Ce n'est pas la pratique de la banque. On avait Madame Aissa Tatal qui devait faire partie des panels qui a eu un empêchement de dernière minute et qui sera remplacé par Monsieur Mohamed El Habib Touré, qui est le directeur de l'analyse et du suivi des investissements à l'Agence de promotion des investissements de Mauritanie, API. Bienvenue, Abi. Monsieur Touré est titulaire d'un master en audit et contrôle de gestion de l'Institut supérieur européen de gestion, ISEG, à Bordeaux. Il a passé 5 ans dans le secteur de l'énergie en France en tant que responsable analyse et recouvrement de trésorerie avant de revenir en Mauritanie il y a une dizaine d'années. Il a travaillé pendant 8 ans dans le secteur bancaire, occupant progressivement des postes comme directeur des moyens généraux, directeur des ressources humaines, directeur de l'organisation et directeur commercial. C'est fort de cette expérience qu'il a rejoint l'APIN il y a 2 ans, en 2022, comme directeur de l'analyse et du suivi des investissements. Bienvenue, Monsieur Touré, merci. Notre deuxième panéliste est un collègue, Boris Angpeji, qui est un professionnel chevronné de la finance, qui possède plus de 15 ans d'expérience dans l'ensemble des opérations non souveraines. Il est actuellement le responsable régional des opérations non souveraines pour le Fonds africain de développement, le FAD, et sur les marchés en transition. Il a également servi la banque en tant que responsable de la gestion des risques, en se concentrant sur l'accroissement de l'emprise des opérations non souveraines de la banque dans les pays à faible revenu. Avant de rejoindre la banque, Boris a occupé plusieurs postes dans le secteur financier au Canada, en particulier dans le domaine de la finance, de la gestion du risque de crédit et de la gestion du portefeuille. Boris est titulaire d'un MBA en finance à l'Université de Laval au Canada. Notre troisième panéliste est un collègue also, Anson C., qui est chargé principal d'évaluation à IDEV, l'équipe d'évaluation indépendante du développement de la banque. Il est titulaire d'une licence en économie agricole de l'Université de Zambie et d'un master en économie environnementale et politique de l'Université de Wageningen aux Pays-Bas. Anson a plus de 15 ans d'expérience avec des organisations internationales et multilatérales de développement dans le suivi, l'établissement de rapports, l'évaluation et la gestion axée sur les résultats. Avant de rejoindre la banque, il a travaillé pour World Vision, Land O'Lakes, le programme des Nations Unies pour le développement, y compris le bureau indépendant d'évaluation à New York et l'agence de développement de l'Union africaine en Afrique du Sud. Au sein de IDEV, Anson est impliqué dans tout type d'évaluation, notamment avec un accent particulier sur le secteur privé, les infrastructures, l'industrialisation, les systèmes électriques, l'énergie, le changement climatique, la croissance verte et l'intégration régionale. Autant dire tout. Donc, bienvenue aux panélistes. Je pense que on n'a pas besoin de revenir sur le déroulé de la session. Je pense que Jane en a parlé dans son introduction. Sans plus tarder, je vais commencer avec votre permission à poser les questions. La première question ira à Anson. Je vais la lire en anglais parce qu'il est anglophone. So Anson, thank you once again. So the first question goes to you. As we know that currently IDEV is conducting an evaluation of the AfDB support for economic diversification, for which you undertook a literature review. Could you please tell us what the literature says about successful diversification strategies and the challenges? Over to you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and I hope you can hear me loud and clear, I think, from wherever you are joining us from, and also to recognize the presence of our chair here, Jackie. Sorry, Jane, who is managing the whole session. So I think it's a proud moment to be here, and also to have a session that is being moderated by, it's someone who has a lot of, I think, connections to the evaluation we're undertaking, as Rwanda is one of the countries where we have a country case study, and she was very instrumental in helping us with some of the preparations for the missions and all the other things. I would try, I think, to follow in the footsteps, I think, of the first presenter, and he was very eloquent, I think, in terms of how he presented a lot of issues on that aspect. So, Dr. Eric, I think it's a very good introduction presentation you gave us, and some of the issues you highlighted already touch on some of the issues that I have lined up to present. Now, we are in the process of finalizing the report, so I will be a bit more careful in terms of what I present, not necessarily to touch on the results per se, because these are still preliminary and there could be some changes in that context. And so we'll try to see how we can keep that space, in terms of not letting out a lot of things, because our evaluations have to be approved by the board before they can be made public. Now, as we all know, I think also as Dr. Eric mentioned, economic diversification is not something that really is the same for all countries. And we recognize that the context, of each country, the development stage, or the development path of a particular country, all those determine how you can actually work in that particular, in that particular country. Now, he highlighted a number of, policies that need to be highlighted. I think one of them I noted was to have a clear diversification strategy and all those other things. So I think from the literature review, we came up, I think, with a number of findings there, but I think there are 5 that stand out generally, and they may integrate some of the issues that we already said before. So the first one is on infrastructure and regional integration. And we know that the bank is really strong in this area and is, we can say has comparative advantage in most of the countries when you go there in this particular sector. They even lead most of the development partners group in this area. Now, this is an interesting area because most of the things the bank does actually yield results in the medium to long term, unless the actual infrastructure investments are well connected, to specific economic diversification priorities of those countries. So an example would be if a country has an industrial zone in one area, and then the bank actually does an access road, which can either help with the supply of inputs, but also helping with the marketing and all those different aspects. So in those cases, then you see a direct link, but it's not something that you see widely in most countries. And then I think this also, the focus on infrastructure and regional integration works quite well. If you look at the country typologies for small to medium kind of open integrated countries, and I think Rwanda was mentioned, if you remember, in the first place. So these are the countries that when they take that space, they can make full use of those opportunities and be able to make use of that potential. Botswana is one of the countries, but the potential is huge, but they are not using it. So it's a peaceful country, they can do a lot in education, health, and different areas. But you can see that those areas are still not fully exploited. And I think this is also linked to, in most cases, also in these countries, to having, proper human capital, skills, development, because these are all the factors that then can attract investors. The second area is on more institutional quality and macroeconomic policy / political stability. I think this also was mentioned by Dr. Eric in his, good presentation, that countries, need to work on, institutional quality and, most importantly, policy consistency. We've had examples, and this is mostly in the cases of the resource-rich countries. They will start quite well, maybe some change of government along the way can change a couple of things, and that may impact, negatively in terms of the outcome of economic diversification. We have various examples and parallels here. So I'm particularly from Zambia, and Zambia is always compared with Argentina. So 2 copper producing countries that have taken different paths ended up in different situations. And I think for Zambia, we had a very good thriving satellite industry along the copper industry in the 70s, up to the 80s, which was more or less wiped out in a very short period of time with political change. Of course, there were other factors, since most of the firms were also, sort of like parastatals, and that also has an impact. And then I think also we need to take note of the fact that, having a deliberate aspect on a deliberate focus on industrialization is key, because economic diversification really helps us to focus on the real economy, which has to generate the goods and services from which you can run many other services from. So you can link services to that, or other, intermediate kind of goods. Now, in this aspect, we see that when most countries are assessed, you know, they seem to really not so much focus on this area for various reasons, because also there's an issue of capital requirement, a lot of technology that is required in these areas, you know, and obviously there are many ways I think that can happen in this area. And not to be so pessimistic, there are some examples of countries that are doing quite well in this area. There are different factors, of course. We know the large ones, of course, like Egypt or South Africa, but you may be surprised that Nigeria actually is actually doing very well in developing this particular sector, particularly to diversify the domestic production capacity in this dimension. I think we've seen also some quite strides that have been made by Ghana or late also in this area, you know, but these are still more or less like early steps, and this is why you are seeing that the overall dimension doesn't look very positive. But in a more specific way, some countries are making these small gains, and in some areas even bigger gains if you look at the factors that are around those particular countries. So maybe Ghana specifically has a very interesting flagship program, you know, a strategy which they call one district, one factory. And, you know, this is another way of how you can do it, you know, in a more faster, accelerated way, in line with the theme of today's discussion. And then I left this one for at this stage, but not to mention it as maybe being lower in terms of ranking in relation to the other factors. So we know that most African countries, you know, have based their development on agricultural transformation for quite some time. Of course, with the exceptions of the mineral and oil-rich countries. But then we see a lot of parallels in this area. For the countries that are traditional agriculture in nature, it really has to look at starting from increasing efficiency and productivity in those sectors. You know, so here we see countries like Tanzania, you know, where there isn't so much value addition, but at least starting from increasing productivity and those dimensions can open up, you know, efficiencies at the other layers of the value chain. And then you also see now countries that are either oil or mineral dominated, which are developing agriculture, but mostly what you see is really for self-sufficiency. So these countries are doing this to substitute imports. And it raises questions. I mean, there are different dynamics, whether this is the most efficient way they should be doing it. But of course, there are other reasons in terms of, you know, national food security and other strategic reasons why this is happening. Agricultural transformation has a lot of potential, and I will refer to maybe Nigeria again, because here we see a lot of effort in terms of processing. You can see the examples of how they've diversified in the area of cassava processing for both consumption, but also for industrial use and export. And here, this is where a lot of jobs actually can be made because of the nature of the investments that more or less tend to combine, you know, some capital investment, but by and large, you know, require a lot of, you know, labor, you know, in terms of labor usage. And then also there's an aspect of, you know, human capital development, which I mentioned earlier, but also particularly innovation. So this is more like the fifth aspect that I want to raise. And tied to this also, we have areas that tie to health also, you know, so if you have a healthy population, you know, of course, in Africa now that we also have the youth population, these also can drive these areas as a potential in terms of resources that you need to keep your production in a more efficient base. But most likely, I think also like we note here, innovation is really one of the key aspects. So you see most African countries still lag in terms of investment in research and innovation. And I think stepping up, you know, investments in this area will definitely be one of the key aspects that can help us, you know, change the situation as it is. So as dire as it may look, I think there are quite a lot of examples in terms of, you know, where countries are doing some interesting aspects. And I think those will also be covered when we come to the other questions on some of the examples of the countries that are doing well, but also in which areas. So I choose to end here for this particular question, and thank you so much. And sorry for exceeding a little bit on the time.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Hanson. On va à la deuxième question avec le deuxième panéliste, Monsieur Touré. Monsieur Habib Touré, selon vous, quel est le principal défi auquel les pays africains sont confrontés dans leur effort de diversification de leur économie? Comment les partenaires au développement tels que la Banque africaine de développement peuvent contribuer à atténuer cet état de fait et ces défis-là? Merci beaucoup. Vous m'entendez, Monsieur Abi?
Allô, ça a coupé un peu, on a une connexion qui est très faible. J'ai pas entendu.
D'accord, je vais reprendre donc la question. Je vous demandais, selon vous, quel est le principal défi auquel les pays africains sont confrontés dans leur effort de diversification économique? Et comment les partenaires au développement, comme la Banque africaine de développement, peuvent aider à relever ces défis?
D'accord, donc merci beaucoup, Madame Touré. Donc moi, c'est Mohamed El Habib Touré. La présentation, je pense qu'elle a parfaitement été faite par vous. Euh, c'est très difficile de passer après les deux interventions précédentes sans se répéter des fois. Mais je tiens à dire que des rapports ont été faits à plusieurs reprises, donc qui sortent les mêmes préoccupations ou en tout cas les mêmes indicateurs. Aujourd'hui, que les pays africains sont fortement dépendants, donc à 60% des exportations. L'économie africaine est très dépendante des exportations et que il y a un manque criant d'infrastructures. Moi, je prends le cas de la Mauritanie, en tout cas, qui peut se transposer à beaucoup de pays africains. On a un problème d'infrastructure, que ce soit au niveau des routes pour accéder aux terres agricoles ou aux zones arabes, que ce soit des problèmes d'électricité. Aujourd'hui, nous produisons de l'électricité très chère et on a un problème aussi de distribution pour en tout cas alimenter nos industries. La faiblesse du secteur privé qui est majoritairement informel et qui a du mal à suivre en tout cas les nouvelles technologies qui sont développées dans le monde. Et je pense que l'un des plus grands défis, c'est un manque de volonté, je pense. C'est un manque de volonté. Parce que comme je disais tantôt, il y a plusieurs rapports qui sont faits chaque année ou chaque 2 ans, chaque 3 ans, qui montrent les mêmes problèmes, les mêmes défis et qui proposent même des solutions. Mais il faut qu'on dépasse ce cap-là de faire des constats et qu'on passe en tout cas à l'action notamment je donne l'exemple de la zone de libre-échange. Aujourd'hui, on est dans des marchés étroits. Sans cette zone de libre-échange, on a du mal à attirer les investisseurs. Nous, en tout cas, au niveau de l'Agence de promotion des investissements, on fait souvent face à ce problème-là où les investisseurs nous disent oui, on veut bien venir en Mauritanie, c'est stable, etc. Mais avec une population de 5 millions d'habitants, on va pas aller très loin. Donc, il est très important, en tout cas, d'accélérer la zone de libre-échange pour le marché. Maintenant, les secteurs, en tout cas, qu'il faut à fort potentiel, c'est le secteur de l'industrie manufacturière. Aujourd'hui, nous exportons toutes nos matières premières. Donc, nous sommes sujets quand il y a une baisse, par exemple, du cours des matières premières, nos économies tanguent un peu. Et quand il y a une augmentation des matières premières, nous importons encore les produits finis qui sont plus chers. Donc, il paraît primordial et il paraît urgent, en tout cas, de développer cette industrie manufacturière et de transformer les matières premières que nous exportons aujourd'hui. Je prends encore l'exemple de la Mauritanie où on est l'une des côtes les plus poissonneuses, mais on exporte le poisson le poisson brut. Et derrière, on importe les sardines et autres produits finis des produits de la pêche. Donc ça aussi, c'est des choses à revoir et des actions à mettre en place rapidement pour éviter cela. Je prends l'exemple du fer que nous exportons aussi de manière brute et derrière, nous acheminons du fer à béton et que nous achetons plus cher. Donc, il y a plusieurs défis qui sont identifiés et je pense pas qu'ils sont faciles, mais des actions doivent être mises en place rapidement pour pouvoir diversifier l'économie africaine très rapidement. Tous les points ne sont pas au rouge. Nous, aujourd'hui, au niveau de la Mauritanie, on sait que nous avons limité l'importation du riz à 80%. Donc, cela aide beaucoup dans la mesure où ça permet en tout cas de stabiliser le prix du riz et ça permet aux populations d'avoir accès à cette denrée-là qui est très consommée avec des prix raisonnables. Nous avons vu le cas récemment du Nigeria, Donc, hier ou avant-hier, ils ont sorti leur premier camion comment dire, de gasoil et d'essence. Ça aussi sont des aspects encourageants et qui militent en tout cas vers une diversification, vers une transformation de nos produits bruts. Maintenant, il faut que la accompagner, comme je disais, c'est délicat. La Mauritanie puisse envoyer au Mali, aujourd'hui que le Niger puisse envoyer son, au niveau de la Mauritanie. Donc, c'est important de développer ces aspects-là. Il y a l'agro-industrie aujourd'hui, j'en parlais tantôt. Je prends l'exemple de la Mauritanie parce que ça s'applique aussi. Aujourd'hui, nous avons 1000 hectares de terre, mais bon, de, euh, de cette superficie-là. Donc, il est temps, en tout cas, de mettre en place des politiques que l'Afrique soit et autosuffisance alimentaire et qu'elle puisse transformer ses produits issus de l'eau alimentaire. Le potentiel est là, le potentiel est là, mais il faut que qu'il y ait des actes qui accompagnent, accompagnent, toutes les stratégies, en tout cas, ou toutes les politiques mises en œuvre. Donc, cette volonté, renforcer les capacités institutionnelles, pouvoir attirer les investisseurs donc, en améliorant le climat des affaires, qui est un enjeu majeur, créer un environnement favorable pour les investissements, investir dans les infrastructures. Aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on puisse... Allô? Allô?
On vous entend, Monsieur Touré.
D'accord. Investir dans les infrastructures. Aujourd'hui, comme je disais, il faut qu'on puisse en tout cas échanger, que ce soit du Maroc, de l'Algérie vers la Mauritanie, en allant au Sénégal, au Mali, etc. Il faut qu'on puisse investir dans les infrastructures routières, qu'on puisse échanger de manière plus fluide, en tout cas, nos productions. Et aussi, diversifier, à mon avis, ne veut pas dire tout faire, qu'un seul pays fasse tout. Aujourd'hui, quand on va en Chine, la population, c'est 1,4 milliard. Donc un vaste territoire. On a plusieurs villes. Quand vous allez dans chaque ville, vous allez voir une spécialisation. Une ville qui est spécialisée dans les nouvelles technologies, une ville qui est spécialisée dans le BTP, une ville qui est spécialisée dans l'automobile, etc. Il faut aussi qu'on puisse créer des champions africains dans chaque secteur. Comme je donnais l'exemple du Nigeria tout à l'heure par rapport au carburant, pourquoi pas un autre exemple, la Mauritanie en termes d'agriculture, pourquoi pas le Sénégal ou le Zimbabwe, etc., en automobile. Donc, il faut vraiment qu'on puisse qu'on puisse se spécialiser, que chaque pays africain, en tout cas, puisse développer un secteur donné. Donc, diversification, oui, mais pas que chaque pays ait essayer de faire tout. Je pense que ça ne sera pas possible dans les réalités qu'on a actuellement. Il y a la formation professionnelle qui est très importante. Donc, parmi les leviers à actionner, la formation professionnelle, pour pouvoir spécialiser en tout cas les jeunes générations qui arrivent et dont la majorité, malheureusement, sont en déperdition scolaire. Les formation professionnelle ne veut pas forcément dire formation scolaire. Il faut aussi qu'on travaille beaucoup sur tout ce qui est stage, tout ce qui est comment dire, formation au sein des entreprises pour pouvoir professionnaliser rapidement la jeunesse et ouvrir des opportunités d'emploi. Quand je parle de formation aussi, je parle pour ceux qui militent pour la cause féminine dont je fais partie. En Mauritanie, récemment, on a fait un recensement. Bon, c'est vrai que le pourcentage n'est pas très grand, mais on a 156 000 femmes de plus que d'hommes pour une population de 4 à 5 millions. Donc, c'est pour vous dire que la femme doit jouer un rôle majeur, en tout cas, dans ce développement de l'Afrique et aussi en matière de formation. Ce sont des gens c'est une catégorie qu'on doit former parce que il y a une main-d'œuvre, une très grande main-d'œuvre qui est présente dans ce vivier-là. Et comme je disais, au risque de me répéter, ma présentation ne va pas être très longue. Je pense que c'est quelques points là que je voulais apporter, mais insister surtout sur le libre-échange entre les pays africains et que cette diversification-là, qu'elle ne se fasse pas par un pays qu'on ne voit pas que c'est dans plusieurs domaines d'activité différents. Voilà.
Merci, Monsieur Touré. Peut-être rapidement sur la deuxième partie de la question, à savoir comment des
Allô?
partenaires... vous m'entendez? Est-ce que vous m'entendez dans la salle?
Oui, Madame Aïssa, nous vous
Oui,
entendons.
allô?
Ils ont quelques soucis de connexion. Monsieur Touré, peut-être si vous souhaitez éteindre votre caméra pour faciliter la connexion. Je sais que vous avez quelques soucis de connexion. On peut essayer aussi comme ça. Merci.
Donc, je disais, Monsieur Touré, si vous pouviez rapidement aborder la deuxième partie de la question, à savoir ce que des partenaires au développement comme la Banque africaine de développement peuvent faire justement pour contribuer à la diversification économique au regard des contraintes que vous avez levées. S'il y avait 3 domaines pour lesquels vous pensez que la banque devrait mettre le curseur pour justement impulser cette diversification-là sur le continent. Merci.
Alors, justement, moi, je vois deux points que j'ai identifiés. Le premier, c'est celui du financement des infrastructures, parce que c'est l'un des problèmes majeurs, en fait, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, auxquels nous faisons face. C'est pouvoir, par exemple, financer des routes qui permettent de traverser, qui permettent aux marchandises, en tout cas, et aux biens de traverser tout le continent, que quelqu'un qui est en Algérie puisse échanger jusqu'à en Angola ou autre. Donc, vraiment, ce problème d'infrastructure et le financement des infrastructures est très important. Le financement, en tout cas, des centrales énergétiques, des centrales de production d'électricité, avec des coûts de production qui sont plus bas que ce qu'on constate actuellement, parce que c'est un gros frein au développement de l'industrie. Le deuxième point, c'est le financement des entreprises. Bon, le financement des entreprises, aujourd'hui, c'est le modèle classique, en tout cas, qu'on voit, c'est que les organismes, les grands organismes comme la Banque africaine de développement, financent des banques et ces banques-là jouent le rôle, en tout cas, de pont pour financer à leur tour des entreprises locales. On a vu, par exemple, qu'en Mauritanie, que ça marchait pas beaucoup. Pourquoi? Parce que la majorité des banques sont détenues par des groupes, en tout cas familiaux, qui financent leur propre activité au lieu de financer réellement l'économie ou les entreprises qui sont dans certains secteurs clés. Donc, pourquoi pas c'est de faire comme le modèle d'Afreximbank qui aujourd'hui permet aux entreprises de venir directement les contacter, d'identifier le projet, d'étudier le projet avec cette entreprise-là et donner un accord sur le financement. Bien sûr, en passant par les banques locales, mais ce financement identifié-là, c'est directement destiné à cette entreprise qui est venue voir Afreximbank ou que Afreximbank a identifié. Donc, c'est revoir un peu ce modèle de financement-là pour moi, pour moi, en tout cas, je pense qui est plus adapté. Parce qu'ici, au niveau de l'agence de promotion, nous recevons beaucoup d'investisseurs qui font face à ce problème de financement-là, parce que les banques locales ne prêtent pas, parce qu'elles sont frileuses, le marché, le secteur est risqué, c'est informel, etc. Il faut demander, et elles demandent beaucoup de garanties. Donc, c'est trouver vraiment un mécanisme pour cibler ces entreprises-là et pour pouvoir financer des secteurs spécifiques et stratégiques pour le développement de nos pays et le développement de l'Afrique. Voilà.
Merci, Monsieur Touré. Vous me donnez l'occasion d'avoir une superbe transition à la troisième question qui va à Boris. Justement, sur votre dernier point, l'accès au financement du secteur privé qui soit adéquat aux besoins. Vous avez mentionné les lignes de crédit. L'exemple de la Mauritanie où les lignes de crédit à travers des banques commerciales n'est pas la seule. Là où on est aussi dans cette région-là, on n'a pas beaucoup d'exemples très, très réussis. Mais on en reviendra. Peut-être que Boris pourra aborder ça dans sa réponse. So Boris, thank you. The third question goes to you. For you, what policies, frameworks, measures, and/or innovative financing mechanism can incentivize private sector engagement and investment in emerging sectors, and how development partners can best support these efforts? I don't know if you want me to repeat the question or you get it right.
No, I got it right. Thank you so much, Isa. And good day to all the participants. So, before starting with the question, answering the question, I think let me first say that, there is a general consensus agreement that a dynamic private sector in any country play a critical role in the economic development or the economic diversification process of that country. This is because the private sector not only, serve as the engine for investment, innovations, and growth, but it is also an effective way, to create jobs, to create revenue for families, and to also create fiscal revenue for government. So in terms of policy, measure, and framework, there are a number of them, quite a number of them, that can incentivize the private sector engagement into certain key sector. Now, when we start unpacking, those policy and those framework and those measures, you will realize that most of them are geared toward what we generally refer to as enabling environment or improving the business environment for the private sector. So this include, things like, sectoral reform that are very targeted. And given that most countries, all the countries in Africa are not homogeneous, each country has its set of opportunities at sectoral level, but it also has its own set of challenge and its level of maturity in terms of economic conditions. So in terms of policy, the policy have to be targeted, toward the need and the opportunity of that country at the sectoral level, particularly in high growth sector, so that it can unleash, the potential of that sector in that country. Another set of policy are the ones that are geared toward, industrializations. And as you will notice, a number of countries across the continent now have been adopting, industrial policy, and that have led to the emergence of a special economic zone across many countries in Africa. If you take the case of instance, of Gabon, we know that, Gabon has historically been an oil-based economy. But over the years, Gabon has tried, for instance, to implement a number of policy that will attract, private sector in other sectors, such as, the wood sector or the forestry sector. Similarly, if you take a country like Benin, where I am from, Benin has been known over many years to be an agro-based economy, by exporting its raw materials such as cotton. But recently, the government there has also adopted a number of policies that have attracted, the private sector in some key sector, and they have also established, one industrial zone, which have led to the emergence or the emergence of a number of manufacturing companies in the country, with investors coming from abroad, to establish the business in Benin, so that they can transform the raw material into semi or final products for exports. Now, the other set of policy also include the one that are geared toward the capital market, so that it can facilitate access to finance, which is also very important, because in order for the private sector, to thrive, they require access to finance. Equally important, for private sector to establish, themselves and to tap into the sectoral opportunity in the country across Africa, they require infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, I'm referring here to things like energy or road, which are very important, because any manufacturing company that is establishing in any country, For instance, to transform the raw material into semi or final product, they require energy. Equally important, road infrastructure is also important so that you can connect, between, the various destinations, either when you are sourcing your raw material or when you are exporting your final product. Now, another set of policy that can also incentivize private sector engagement is the one that is geared toward entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is that, the various regulatory reform that can make it easier, for enterprise to develop themselves, to establish themselves, so that they can actually, easily do business in the concerned country. Now, let me move on quickly to innovating financing that can incentivize the private sector engagement. There are a number of them, and I'm sure that most of the participants are very familiar with the blended finance mechanism, which have been playing a critical role in enabling greater private sector engagement across various sectors in the continent. So if I take, for instance, in the power sector, for instance, at the AfDB, we have, some trust fund, which we usually utilize to kind of blend those resources with our own resources to facilitate, the implementation of a number of projects that are being developed by the private sector. Because if you look closely at the issue or the challenge that prevent private sector engagement in certain sector, it is the perception of risk. So in order for one to mitigate those risks, blended finance is one of those key instruments where you try, to take, concessional money with that of commercial, so that, the balance can be something that will be attractive to the private sector. Equally important, we have a number of credit enhancement instruments, such as risk mitigation instrument, and how those ones are utilized. They're utilized in manner in which they can be customized depending on the need of the country, also on the need of the specific project, so that we can achieve the end result, which is to attract, the private sector into the specific area of interventions. Now, the last part of the questions, I think, referred to how development partner can support those efforts in Africa. So when we look at, development partner, particularly multilateral development bank and the like, such as the African Development Bank, most of them are actually, functions in ways that they targeted sovereign operations in one hand, but also the non-sovereign operations. So on the sovereign operations, one of the critical ways that a development partner can support is that at an upstream level in the country or in the regions, through the various intervention or policy dialogue, is to engage with government in a way that government will target, the specific sector of opportunity or area of reforms that, will enable, the private sector to reach its full potential. So that is one way of the development partner to support the private sector engagement. And on the non-sovereign side, most of the multilateral development bank, particularly AfDB, we have a cocktail of instruments, and we're also very flexible in terms of how we provide those instruments so that we can support the private sector across the continent so that they can actually take on, innovative projects. And when one talk about economic diversifications, usually it is a journey where country is trying, to tap into the potential of the other sector that might have been, otherwise overlooked at or underdeveloped. And when you start that journey, there is always that perception of risk that comes with it. And that is where, the development partner actually come into play to provide that comfort to the private sector and to take on some of those risks and accompany them throughout that journey. And now, allow me to quickly touch on the question or the statement that was earlier made by Mr. Habib Toure, regarding the financial sector and how, development bank like AfDB have been supporting local banks. I think, there is one important aspect that we must keep in mind when, we are looking at how, AfDB or perhaps other multilateral development banks operate. So at the heart of our interventions is what we refer to as additionality. And equally important, our role is not to crowd out, for instance, commercial financiers, but rather to support them. So in doing so, we cannot always, support every smaller level of project. And one of the ways that we have tried, to address, that financing gap or that financing need at a country level, but also at regional level, is by providing, financing to local banks, but also to regional banks. I think, the example of AfRESIM was given earlier, but one thing that many people might not be aware of is that the AfDB is actually one of the founding partners of AfRESIM Bank. So we are shareholder of AfRESIM Bank. And one of the reasons why we do support those regional institutions is because we want them to lead in specific area where we believe that they have the capacity and the manpower to do so. So we will be supporting them at the macro level by giving them the early financing support that they require, and also provide them with line of credit. Equally important, at the local bank level, what we do is whenever that we are providing a line of credit or risk participation agreement to any banks, we always ensure that, that financing will be geared toward, a specific, either a specific sector, such as, or a specific segment, such as trade finance, or either through a specific sector. And one of the ways that we ensure that, financing is being redirected toward those segments, such as SMEs, is that we do monitor, how those money are being given by those banks. But in all great time of trying, to do that, is not a perfect world. Of course, there will be area of weaknesses, and we always try, to strengthen them, and we always try also to be innovative in our approach. Another example that I can give very quickly, in cases where we want to support projects at a country level. For instance, there have been cases where we use our guarantee instrument to support a local bank so that that local bank in turn can provide a local currency-based financing to a specific project in that country. So there are a number of ways that we do support, our projects. There are a number of ways that we do support sectors. And we are always, trying to innovate and to also enhance, our core area of interventions. So let me stop here, and I can come back on later. Thank you.
Merci, merci Boris pour ces explications. Je pense que comme on est dans la semaine de IDEV, j'espère que dans les prochaines itérations, pas maintenant, on aura peut-être une évaluation sur les lignes de crédit de la banque pour voir comment on peut les rendre plus efficaces, parce que ce que M. Touré a dit sur la Mauritanie, on le voit ailleurs, notamment au Rwanda. Mais je pense que c'est un vrai sujet, malgré les efforts que la banque fournit. Je pense qu'on peut avoir de meilleurs retours sur investissement sur ces lignes de crédit qui sont très, très nécessaires pour le secteur privé, notamment les SMEs sur le continent. Sans plus tarder, je me retourne vers Hanson pour la deuxième question qui le concerne. Je vais peut-être demander aux panélistes d'être un peu plus, j'ai été généreuse sur la première série de questions, d'être un peu plus succinct sur la deuxième, comme ça on peut avoir peut-être un follow-up question, parce que j'ai une question pour vous tous à la fin. So Hanson, the second question is for you, as I said. So from your perspective, what has been the most effective strategies or policies implemented by African countries to promote economic diversification? Can you provide some specific examples and initiatives? And I think that you have provided some of the responses in giving examples of Nigeria or Zambia or Ghana, but maybe because it counterbalance a bit the gloom situation that Eric has described. And then we see, and we can, maybe you can also tell us, how do we bring those at scale so that the picture change from one year to the other, or from one decade to the other? Thank you, Anson. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think I'll just build on where I started and then try to zero in more on some of those specific cases which we think are really showing light or giving us hope for in the future in terms of how we can expand or scale up some of these things related to economic diversification. Now, I think as we mentioned before, one of the areas that, in terms of policies where we think we should really be thrusting, as we said, is definitely on infrastructure, but definitely infrastructure itself, like we said, has to be very much tailored to the needs of those specific countries. If a country has a clear diversification strategy, and then it becomes easy also, to link, the bank infrastructure to some of those priorities. Now, we know that when the bank is doing this, is addressing many objectives, and economic diversification is not really one of those specific core themes that is being prioritized as a single entity, say if you compare with gender or environment, or other cross-cutting themes. So this is something I think that has to be taken up the sleeve within the bank, to see that most of these infrastructure investments are much more tied to priority areas where the bank is, where the countries are trying to diversify their economies. I gave an example, of a country where they have an industrial zone, and then the bank does a road, that goes all the way to that industrial zone. I think Cameroon is one of the countries where the bank has done that, and also this actually helps quite a lot. We also have countries like Tanzania, where we have the standard gauge rail, which is just up and running currently, and the bank has invested more in terms of the infrastructure along the border. So this is more not the hard kind of infrastructure, more on the soft side. So operations of one-stop border posts, which then may actually now, allow the, the expansion of trade along those particular lines to ensure that we have a bigger outreach at the regional level. So I think these are some of the practical examples that we think, if taken on board and expanded, would also be much more useful. And then also we talked about the issue of the policy aspects, in terms of policy continuity and also strengthening institutions. This is an area where it's quite a challenge, I think. First of all, economic diversification deals with, adding value, and adding value also has its own other challenges in terms of how the African countries have to engage with the developed countries in terms of markets. So it's not an easy space for most countries. Things have to be negotiated very well, but also how you can, get the niche in that particular area. What we think is critical also in this dimension is that when countries are negotiating these agreements, especially for resource extractions, that's a time when, they can make sure that they get better deals. And I think the one country stands out, I think Botswana in this area, in terms of getting a good return from the diamond investment, which they've actually, plowed back into social services and also developing other sectors like agriculture, which are also, on their way, to becoming other alternative sectors. Overall, you can see that in Botswana, the non-diamond sector's contribution to GDP is growing steadily, and these are some of the examples we can look at as well. Now, in terms of agricultural transformation, as I said, this is one area also which is also quite interesting. And also this also links to infrastructure. So most African countries are strong in this area, but most of what you are doing is actually linked to maybe pre-colonial kind of, investment areas where we're producing goods to export to countries, that were either our colonizers or those that we have stronger links economically with them. But then it's how do we change this and try to focus on more growth zones within the specific countries. And that could be one dimension on how we can strengthen the agro-processing zone. So African countries up to date still import a lot of things, including food, surprisingly, from external countries. And this is an area that can actually be covered, with domestic production, with right investment. So this is an area that we should really be looking at. On industrialization, I think, like we say, it's being more deliberate, but then also, trying to ensure that we put in right investments in that particular area. We know foreign direct investment is a key, and also that also requires to have certain conditions in place. But as we've seen also with the COVID-19 and other developments, this aspect is not as big as it was before. So now countries have to dig in deeper into their own resources to find ways on how to finance this. And at the center of this is how we can finance the private sector, to take up these particular areas. There are a lot of issues, I think, around the SMEs, but maybe I would rather not delve into this at this particular time, because those we can address them I think at a later time. So I think basically this would be how I would probably summarize it, unless I left out something, Madam Moderator. So I can end here for now. Thank you.
No, thank you, Anson, for providing other good examples on the continent in different aspects. And I think that it only tells us that it's possible with political will and the right decisions and policies. So I'll go to, je vais passer à Monsieur Touré pour la seconde question, à savoir quels sont les secteurs, de votre point de vue, les plus promoteurs pour la diversification économique en Afrique, comment ces promesses peuvent se transformer en succès et être reproduites à l'échelle sur le continent. Vous avez parlé de la Mauritanie, en donnant l'exemple parce que c'est ce que vous connaissez le plus, mais je pense que vous avez aussi peut-être d'autres exemples sur le continent qu'on peut mener à l'échelle. Merci beaucoup.
Votre micro, Monsieur Touré.
Allô?
Oui, allez-y, on vous entend maintenant.
Oui, Madame Touré, si vous pouvez, parce que la vidéo a été réactivée, si vous pouvez rapidement répéter la question, ça a craché un peu.
Non, il n'y a aucun problème. Donc, je vous demandais, de votre point de vue, quels sont les secteurs les plus promoteurs pour, pour la diversification économique sur le continent et
D'accord.
comment ces promesses-là peuvent se transformer en succès et être reproduites à l'échelle sur le continent. Je disais donc que vous aviez donné quelques exemples de la Mauritanie, en tout cas en termes de prospects, de possibilités. Est-ce que vous en avez d'autres? Merci beaucoup. Les secteurs prometteurs.
Oui, pour les secteurs, moi j'en identifie deux majeurs. On a parlé tout à l'heure de la Covid. C'était un handicap, mais je pense que les pays africains ont été les moins touchés. Et on aurait pu transformer ça en opportunité et pas être en avance par rapport aux autres, mais un peu en tout cas de retard. On a vu que lorsque les frontières étaient fermées, on a eu tous les problèmes du monde. Donc, il est temps en tout cas de développer ce secteur industriel-là pour transformer aujourd'hui ce que nous produisons comme matière première. Le fer en Mauritanie, le poisson en Mauritanie, le pétrole au Nigeria, l'arachide au Sénégal. Donc, on a d'autres exemples de succès. Aujourd'hui, quand on voit le secteur avicole au Sénégal, c'est un exemple que nous devons tous suivre. Aujourd'hui, le Sénégal n'importe plus. Je prends l'exemple du Sénégal. Le Sénégal n'importe plus de poulet, contrairement à la Mauritanie, au Mali ou d'autres pays qui dépendent toujours de l'importation de poulet. Aujourd'hui, quand on regarde d'autres pays comme le Rwanda, qui en tout cas arrive à développer plusieurs secteurs d'activité et à être indépendant sur certains aspects, je pense qu'il faut appuyer sur ces leviers-là. Quand je prends le secteur de l'agroalimentaire, encore, je vais redonner l'exemple de la Mauritanie parce que c'est ce que je maîtrise le plus. 500 000 hectares de terres arables aujourd'hui, ça peut produire beaucoup. Aujourd'hui, on n'utilise que 20% et on arrive à être autosuffisant en termes de riz. Le Sénégal, pareil, aujourd'hui, a limité les importations de riz parce qu'ils arrivent en tout cas à produire une grande quantité de ce qu'ils consomment. Mais il y a aussi le développement des infrastructures qui est très important parce que nous produisons beaucoup aussi, mais des fois que nous jetons à la poubelle parce que nous n'avons pas les capacités de stockage nécessaires. Et je prends l'exemple de l'oignon, l'exemple des pommes de terre. Donc, je reviens encore à l'agroalimentaire. Donc, voilà vraiment les deux secteurs, c'est-à-dire l'industrie et l'agroalimentaire, que nous devons vraiment faire des efforts là-dessus. Il y a un secteur qu'il ne faut pas négliger, c'est celui de l'éducation et de la santé. L'éducation, parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons, je reviens sur la formation professionnelle, nous avons beaucoup de jeunes chômeurs qui n'ont aucune qualification. Donc, c'est des secteurs vraiment sur lesquels il faut mettre l'accent parce qu'il y a des expertises qui commencent à se développer un peu partout. Au Sénégal, où ils mettent en place des écoles dans le domaine du oil and gas, d'autres pays qui mettent en place comment dire, des centres de formation spécialisés. Donc, vraiment, il faut développer ce secteur-là. La santé, comme on le sait, une population malade, c'est une population qui pourra pas être efficace ou efficiente. Donc, il faut vraiment développer ce secteur-là pour qu'on puisse, en tout cas, déjà qu'on arrête d'exporter nos malades vers l'étranger, que ce soit nos dirigeants ou nos populations, et qu'on ait une population qui est en bonne santé et qui est éduquée. Voilà, en tout cas, les trois secteurs que je vois.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur Touré. On va passer donc, si vous me permettez, je pense que le secteur du sport devient aussi un secteur émergent qui peut absorber beaucoup de la main-d'œuvre jeune que l'on a. Mais bon, c'est un sujet pour une autre fois. Donc, je me tourne vers Boris. So, Boris, if you can tell us the importance of regional trade and economic integration, and how this could also contribute or lead the economic diversification of Africa. If you have examples that you can share with us so that we can learn from them and to see how we can build and then bring them at scale on the continent. So it's pretty much like the second question I asked to answer, but this is more about regional trade and economic integration. Merci beaucoup. Did you get my question?
Yes, I did. I was trying to unmute myself. So thank you so much, Isa. So, I would say that regional trade and economic integration play, a crucial role in supporting economic diversifications across the African continent. Because, when countries are trying to diversify their economy, by tapping into the various opportunities in the older undeveloped sector, they cannot just rely on their own internal market, right? So they will require, other larger market if they really want to do diversification at a scale. And that is when, that is where actually the importance of regional economic and trade integrations comes into place. So by removing, things like, trade and tariff barrier, by harmonizing regulation and standards, by streamlining border process, by allowing, the free movement of goods of people, country can easily, have access to a larger market so that they can actually be able, to reach the full potential in their respective sector. Because whenever that you talk about developing any sector, be it in the agri or even in the energy, although many countries in Africa have not reached that level where they can actually export energy, but in the agri sector, if you are manufacturing a product that your own market cannot consume fully, you will require other market to sell it to. And what you want is that in doing that process, you don't want to have, barriers or regulation that will prevent you to do that easily. And that is where, the regional economic and trade integrations is a very important tool. So in a nutshell, if I wanted to sum it up on that area, without those, free trade area, custom union, or common market, it will be very difficult for any single country on a standalone basis to fully achieve, economic diversifications. Now, in terms of example, I can quickly give two. I think one that is very illustrative is the case of Lesotho, which is a very small country in the southern region of Africa. And as you will notice, over the years, Lesotho has been, diversifying its economies. And one of the area in which it has tried is to tap into, the car seat leather industry. So manufacturing of car seat leather. Now, Lesotho, with a population of 2.3 or 2.4 million, cannot really do that at a scale. It's required another market. Equally important, Lesotho does not have that, very strong automotive industry. But Lesotho does have a country, a neighboring country like South Africa, with a big automotive market. So most of, if not all, of the, car seat leather that are manufactured in Lesotho are exported into South Africa. And that would have not been feasible or easily done if Lesotho and South Africa were not part of the SADC, which is the Southern African Development Community. And equally important, if both countries were not part of the, the Southern Region Custom Union. So that is one example. Another key example that comes to mind is the case of Rwanda. So as you have noticed, I think Rwanda has been diversifying its economies across various sectors. And if my memory serves me well, I think it was 2018 or 2017, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world, Volkswagen, implement one of its factory in Rwanda. But when you look at the population of Rwanda, today is around 13 to 14 million. So if those cars are manufactured in Rwanda, the Rwanda population cannot consume all those cars. So they need to be exported into other neighboring countries like Uganda and Tanzania. So with Rwanda being part of the Eastern African community, it makes it easier, to kind of like sell those cars with less restriction, with less, trade barrier. Equally important, I think one other area in which Rwanda has been now trying, to kind of like diversify its economy is in the pharmaceutical industry. So anyone who talk about, manufacturing vaccine or medicine know that will require a big market so that it can absorb it. So with Rwanda being part of that Eastern community where you have, harmonization of standard, harmonization of regulations, a certain level of free movement of goods, it will make it much easier, for Rwanda to develop those sectors at scale. Now, very importantly, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, those countries that are embarking on those journey of diversifying the economics will actually, tap into a very large market beyond, their regions and at a continental level. So I will stop here and yield back to Aïssa. Thank you.
Merci Boris. Justement, j'allais rebondir sur le fait qu'on a la ZLECA qui est le cadre, un des marchés qui doit nous fournir le plus gros marché du monde. Malheureusement, comme disait M. Touré, des fois, on peut se poser la question de la volonté politique de la mettre en œuvre à l'échelle où elle devrait être. En tout cas, merci beaucoup pour les réponses. Et bon, encore une fois, on voit que sur toutes ces questions-là, on a quand même des bons exemples. Donc, c'est pas que on ne sait pas comment faire, c'est comment justement avoir ces bonnes pratiques à l'échelle du continent pour pouvoir changer le narratif. Maintenant, on arrive à la dernière question qui est la même pour tous. Donc là, je serai légèrement un peu plus sévère, 4 minutes chacun. Comme ça, on pourra avoir le record on a fini à temps. Donc la question s'intitule comme suit. Anson, I'll let you start. Then Habib and Boris in the same order. So Anson, looking ahead, what are the key actions should the African Development Bank take or support under our TYS 2024-2033 to support economic diversification? How can we ensure that these initiatives are sustainable and inclusive? And yes, so yes, I'll let you respond to that. And maybe building, because you responded, some of you responded to the question already, but building to some of the additional areas you believe that the bank should put the focus.
All right, so thank you so much. I see the mic is lagging a bit. So okay. So, yeah. Okay. So I think what I will say is maybe I can start just to add quickly. I know the time is limited on some of the areas that the bank should be focusing on. And I won't go into so much detail because I have to tackle the other questions. So I think we talked about agro industries and value addition, which I think the bank still does quite well and it needs to be expanded under the Feed Africa initiative. There is value addition in mining, but we also see a lot of growth actually in the quarrying. So if you look at Africa in terms of cement production, for example, a lot has happened there. Most of it is being produced locally or with African enterprises away from maybe, conglomerates that way from other countries. We see e-commerce and digital economy as one of the key areas as well. And this one, I think Africa by 2025 will have about 5 billion people that will be engaged in e-commerce. Then service provision, I think examples are there. Rwanda, we can talk of Seychelles, Mauritius, those areas are doing quite well. And then also the creative arts industry. And I think just to note that, Madam Moderator, you also spoke about sports. So maybe that could be one other area. I think the bank, interestingly, is looking at this quite seriously with its youth strategy. And I think in Nigeria, they even have an interesting project, in terms of investment in digital and creative industries. So there are some of the things that the bank is doing. And then we also have other sectors, of course, the blue economy sector, is it? Aquaculture and fisheries at the center of that dimension as well. And I think I haven't mentioned tourism, of course, for obvious reasons, but not to say it's one area we can leave out because we have unique resources that we can capitalize on it. I think the key thing is to know how we manage the risks based on the experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic. On the question on how we look ahead, I think the future looks bright, I think, with the new 10-year strategy. And here we are looking at two dimensions, so inclusive green growth, but also driving prosperous and resilient communities. We think the focus on resilience provides many avenues, also from the bank perspective. We have seen economic diversification as something that will happen from the things we are doing, not very deliberate in terms of focusing on it, but now looking at it from the point of view of how we can use that as a means of preserving the gains in the countries where we are operating. Because we have cycles where countries do well for 10 years and then a shock hits and then you go back five years behind, you have to start rebuilding. So that's one area I think that is quite important. And the bank has made commitments in this area. I think they emphasize areas of industry, agro processing, but we feel it could be more specific because right now, as we've seen also in the last cycle, it hasn't been. If we talk of infrastructure, like we say, we do a lot, but we're not so much spending on the actual, industries. So, for example, within the bank itself, operations that focus on industry are just about 13%. In total, actually, those that we think directly contribute to economic diversification are only 13 of all the operations. It's 13% of all the operations in the bank. So we need to balance, I think, not looking at investments in infrastructure for medium to long-term conditions, but also what we can do directly. So agro-processing industries, also these dimensions that I mentioned here of actual industrial production itself. The other aspect, I think, is to look at these opportunities of how, we can look at the instruments that the bank has. This issue was discussed before, but I think let's look at it from the aspect of what I mentioned before, how we balance our long-term investments, what we can do for quick and short-term results by investing directly in areas that contribute to economic diversification. Most of what we are doing now is more indirect, I think, except in a few areas where we can see the direct connection. Then we see also another aspect on the finance aspect. This has been discussed at large, but if you look at the bank operations, most of these operations actually end up either being closed or terminated. If you look at, in terms of the portfolio of the bank, around the SMEs is quite a big challenge. We're doing quite well with the bigger private institutions under the NSO framework, although we need to increase that portfolio, but particularly the SME component has a lot of challenges and I don't think we're really achieving what we aspire in that particular dimension. The last part, I think, is to look at it from the results perspective. So in the current results framework, we have some specific results, but they're at a very high level. Once you go to the country and the operations themselves, it becomes a challenge. This is because economic diversification is not really given that prominence. It's a difficult thing. I mean, we don't know how we can do this, either to promote it as a specific theme or, you know, an area that we should be really focusing on. These are some of the questions we are grappling with currently, but I think there's something that has to be done to see how we can manage this dimension. One of the aspects, I think, is to see how we can bring in structure, doing it in a more systematic way also, you know, so that there can also be guidance on how it can be done. But depending on the needs of the different countries, you cannot just have a one kind of approach for all the different countries. So I think I'll end here, and thank you so much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. Habib, je trouve la question en français. Donc, c'est la même question en fait, c'est de savoir à l'avenir quelles sont les actions clés que la banque devrait prendre ou appuyer, surtout dans le cadre de la stratégie décennale 2024-2033, et comment s'assurer que ces investissements, ces initiatives soient durables et inclusives. Je pense que ça rejoint un peu ce que vous aviez dit dans la réponse précédente, mais s'il y avait d'autres éléments où vous pensiez que la banque devrait mettre le curseur au-delà des infrastructures, au-delà de la santé, de l'éducation, voilà, et les infrastructures et l'agro-industrie, pardon. Oui. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez que quel aspect la banque devrait mettre le curseur pour les 10 prochaines années? Au-delà de ce que vous avez déjà dit dans la réponse, dans la question précédente.
Alors, c'est à moi, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, c'est à vous.
D'accord. Alors, au-delà de ce que j'ai dit dans les questions précédentes, enfin les réponses précédentes, parce que, comme dit la question, l'avenir est déjà en vue, donc il y a certaines choses qui sont forcément mises en place, mais je n'ai pas insisté sur l'aspect technologique. Aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on arrive en tout cas à se mettre à niveau. Je donne un parfait exemple qui est l'Algérie. Aujourd'hui, quand vous allez en Algérie, il y a beaucoup de produits, en tout cas comme l'électroménager, qu'ils font directement chez eux. Donc, ils n'ont plus besoin d'importer ce type de matériel de l'étranger. Donc, le développement technologique est très important et je n'avais pas beaucoup insisté là-dessus. L'autre aspect, c'est aussi de mettre en place des stratégies sectorielles. Pourquoi pas ne pas dire, je sais pas, pour cette année ou dans 2 ans, nous nous focalisons sur un secteur déterminé. Identifions quels sont les besoins ou quels sont les produits que l'Afrique importe le plus et pourquoi ne pas se focaliser sur ce secteur-là pour en tout cas créer une certaine valeur ajoutée dans ces secteurs en question. Là, je viens d'apprendre que les autos produisent des sièges en cuir. Donc, je l'ai appris aujourd'hui et ça, c'est un parfait exemple. Aujourd'hui, si je prends les autos qui produisent du cuir, je prends la Mauritanie qui a un cheptel de 20 millions de têtes de bétail et qui produit énormément de peau de mouton ou de peau de vache. Et aujourd'hui, cette peau-là, elle est la plupart du temps jetée, abîmée ou vendue en tout cas en l'état brut. Pourquoi ne pas créer une certaine chaîne de valeur en tout cas où la Mauritanie pourrait attirer des investisseurs qui transforment cette peau-là en cuir et que la Mauritanie va envoyer aux Lesotho. Donc, on en revient à la zone de libre-échange. Pourquoi ne pas mettre en place une plateforme, en tout cas d'échange de ce type d'idées-là ou de ce type de projet, mettre en place une plateforme qui permettra à un producteur qui est au Lesotho de savoir qu'il peut trouver la matière première au niveau de la Mauritanie, un producteur qui est au Kenya de savoir qu'il peut trouver une matière première dans un autre pays. Donc ça aussi, je pense que c'est des sujets sur lesquels il faut réfléchir. Et je reviens rapidement au financement pour dire à M. Boris, peut-être qu'il faut investir plus au niveau d'Afreximbank parce qu'on voit, et c'est un problème majeur aujourd'hui en Afrique, c'est que quand tu viens, tu es une PME, quelle que soit l'idée que tu as, quelle que soit l'importance du projet que tu approches une banque, même s'il y a une ligne de crédit de la Banque africaine de développement qui est destinée à cette ligne-là, tu auras du mal à y accéder. Pourquoi? Parce que peut-être la banque a mis en place des règles qui ne te permettent pas d'être éligible à cette ligne-là. ou que la banque te demande des garanties que tu ne pourras jamais avoir et qui te bloque. Aujourd'hui, on a des mécanismes comme le Fonds africain de garantie. Il y a d'autres fonds de garantie qui peuvent entrer en jeu. Mais la banque, je donne encore l'exemple de la banque mauritanienne, tant qu'elle n'a pas une garantie foncière, elle ne va pas t'accompagner, même si elle sait qu'il y a Afreximbank à côté, et même si elle sait qu'il y a Fagas à côté ou d'autres fonds de garantie à côté. Donc, il faut vraiment, parce que nous, ce qu'on cherche aujourd'hui, ce sont des stratégies qui marchent. D'accord? Il faut, si aujourd'hui la ligne de crédit classique ou conventionnelle ne marche pas, il faut repenser à autre chose. Maintenant, pour le financement des infrastructures, là, pour le financement des infrastructures aussi, il faut peut-être demander certaines réformes. Je ne sais pas comment ça va se passer, mais demander certaines réformes politiques ou demander certaines garanties en tout cas pour débloquer certains financements. Parce que ça pose problème aussi aujourd'hui, des financements qui sont destinés à tel ou tel secteur ou telle activité, qui sont orientés vers d'autres fins. Donc, soutien au PME, on en a déjà parlé. Donc, il faut vraiment qu'on insiste sur ce canal de financement-là. Et la formation, on en a déjà parlé, donc on va pas revenir dessus. Je pense que ce sont les différents points que je voulais aborder et vraiment conditionner les financements par des réformes. Aujourd'hui, on voit que les États-Unis, ils le font. Ils ne financent pas tant que vous n'avez pas montré patte blanche ou tant que vous n'avez pas montré que vous avez pris des réformes dans tel ou tel domaine. Donc, je pense que ce serait bien aussi au niveau de la Banque africaine de développement de voir ces aspects-là. Et dernier point, les chaînes de valeur. C'est mon dernier point, je m'arrête là. Les chaînes de valeur. Aujourd'hui, j'ai donné l'exemple tantôt du Sénégal avec les poulets qui ne sont plus importés, mais ils importent toujours le maïs qui entre, je pense que c'est 60% du coût de production du poulet. Et là aussi, ça plombe les choses. La zone de libre-échange, aujourd'hui, moi, je veux que s'il y a une surproduction d'oignons ou de pommes de terre en Mauritanie, que je puisse vendre ça au Mali, au Sénégal ou ailleurs. Donc voilà, il y a vraiment une synergie à mettre en place et les constats sont faits. Maintenant, il faut vraiment qu'on change la donne et qu'on mette en place les choses. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Habib. Boris, la même question, dernière question pour vous, mais Hanson et Habib vont manger de votre temps. Donc, vous avez 2 minutes to be able to tell us, looking ahead, what the TYS 2025, the current TYS that you know should be focusing on when it comes to economic diversification, and once this is done, how it can be sustainable and more inclusive. And just realize that it's only Habib who spoke about gender and the fact that women have to be part of that journey, because when you have half of the continent, being in one, being women and they are nowhere to be seen, and not at the scale they should be, I think we also need to question ourselves. So over to you, 2 minutes. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Chair. So, the first thing that I would say is that the new 10-year strategy of the bank is actually an ambition plan that laid out how the bank intended to invest in Africa-based assets. But at the heart of that strategy, you notice that the bank will bring, engagement with the private sector as one of the key areas. So in terms of the area where, where the bank can intensify its intervention, which is already been done, but I'm sure that they do take time for people to see the results. So one of those areas will be that we needed to find, additional and innovative approach to combine, our intervention being at the sovereign operation level, and also equally important at the non-sovereign operation level, which is private sector, to support the enabling environment in all the countries across the continent, so that we can help those countries to diversify the economy, to catalyze and mobilize private sector investment at the country level, but also at the sectoral level. And equally important, I think that's something that we have been trying to improve, and I think that we have actually made a great success on that, is that to strategically targeted our interventions, while also at the same time trying to address, the challenges that are preventing, some of our country on the continent to reach their full potentials. So, those various interventions, will span across, our various area, be it on the regional integrations, where we will be focusing on intensifying, connectivity, road, power, or also, I hear many people talk about the SME, but I can assure you that there are a lot of work now currently going on within the bank, to review or to revisit our approach to how we support SME, be it on the advisory side, but also on the financing side. So in terms now of how to ensure that all those efforts are inclusive and sustainable, I think one element that one can do is to track, the progress as we are moving along, to ensure that, action are taken to actually, improve area of weaknesses. And another element that was mentioned is, women, gender, and all the other cross-cutting area of priority. They are indeed, at the heart of what the bank is trying to do, with this new 10-year strategy. And we have actually, a number of programs that are already existing, but they will be intensified. One of them is AFAWA, which is well known and which has actually, been very supportive of women entrepreneurship across the continent. And there will be other area, where the bank will use its comparative advantage, to scale up, the progress across the continent through the 10-year strategy. So I will stop here and thank you to all of you guys.
Thank you so much, Boris, Habib, and Anson. We're getting to the end of the panel interaction. Stay tuned because we're opening the floor to participants to ask questions, make comments. Maybe Raki can tell me, because I don't, as Jane said in the introduction, you can raise your hand if you want to take the floor. We have approximately 50 minutes to interact with the panel, including Eric. I hope he's still online, because I'm sure that there is a lot of, your presentation was such telling that you might have some questions too. So Raki, if you can guide me, if there are questions on the chat already. I just saw it was not a question. I think it was marked saying that there was evaluation on the lines of credits, which is fine. We can have access to that. But if there are specific questions, otherwise, colleagues are connected, stay tuned and then ask your comments and make your interventions. You can raise your hand.
Thank you, Vanessa. Aissa, sorry. I think that because we wanted to start with some question for Eric, there is one that is in the chat. And the question is if Eric can speak a bit on specific skills and sectors that Africa should prioritize as drivers for economic diversification. Would you like to hear other questions? The others might be for several panelists, and they are in French, so I can read them, unless we can, for now, give the floor to Eric to respond to this question, specific one.
I think maybe having 2 or 3 questions in the chat so that it allows the panelists that these questions are directed to prepare themselves while Eric is making his response. Peut-être que ce serait mieux de...
OK. So, nous avons une autre question de la part d'un économiste et expert en planification, suivi, évaluation, qui demande quelle stratégie mettre en place en synergie avec la BAD pour assurer la mise en place d'infrastructures adéquates et assurer une plus grande diversification de leur économie, et il fait référence notamment au Cameroun. On a une troisième question. L'entrée en vigueur effective de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine ne peut-elle pas contribuer à une plus grande diversification des économies africaines? Je peux répéter les questions si au besoin. On va commencer avec ces 3 questions. Merci.
D'accord. Oui, effectivement. Et on va distribuer. Enfin, les deux autres questions, peut-être qu'on va demander aux uns et aux autres de chip in, de se préparer à pouvoir répondre, notamment Boris et Hanson, et Habib peut contribuer. Over to you, Eric, for the first question.
Maybe if he's not around, you can maybe move to the next question. Is Isa?
Hello, so is it me you want to do you want me to intervene now?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think I heard the question about what sectors and what specific skills we should be thinking about, in Africa if we want to achieve economic transformation. I think in terms of specific skills, we should be thinking about what we call job for the future. So what that means is we should stop looking at the present, but start thinking and be futuristic. Take a look, for example, at also learning from some of the countries who have succeeded in diversifying the economies. What type of skills are they developing? You look at Southeast Asia, you look at especially Asia in specific. You have a lot of skills in science and technology, that is really helping those countries to do as well as possible. Because if you're thinking in terms of the future, what are the activities that will be in demand? What are the products that will be in demand? Issues of value-adding services, those should be the driving force. The challenge we're having in Africa today is the type of education we have does not really match what is the demand in the market. In the market, you go to the job place, you see completely different needs in terms of skills that are required. So the question is, to what extent is our education system actually fitting into the market? And for me, this is where there has to be this industry academic interface where they're speaking to each other. In industry, they can identify these are the specific type of skills that are required in the job market. Then this information is taken to the education sector, and that is used to redesign the curriculum of the schools, whether from secondary, from primary school, up to the university level, so that those skills that are really needed, can be developed for these, for the youth, for the women, and all, those who are learning, within the continent. So I would say in terms of skills, like I said, science and technology is very important. And what we have seen in Africa is if you look at enrollment for this type of skills at the secondary school level, at the tertiary level, they are pretty low. For you to be able to maybe get apply for patent, skills, some innovations that are required. I think these are important skills that we need to have. So the training that we're having should not be just for academic purposes. We have a master's, we have a PhD, but the question is, what can we do? What are the soft skills that are required for us to be able to play, not just at the continental level, but be competitive globally, wherever you can think about? I think those are the skills that will attract some investors that we talked about earlier to say, okay, we see a potential here. And ask yourself, for example, why are investors moving to China? Why do they go to India? Why do they go to South Asian countries to invest? Because they see potential there in terms of not just the environment, but also the skills that are required to thrive, to ensure that their business, move on well. So in a situation where you're considering where you want to site a business, the first thing you want to ask is, do you have people who have the basic skills that are needed to either operate the machines, either to operate the very sophisticated, could it be computer programs that are required to make things happen? Currently, people are talking globally, there's a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence. To what extent are we incorporating this in our curriculum to ensure that we are positioning ourselves for that future of jobs. So I think those are things we need to really think about. We need to step back and reassess and do some kind of needs assessment of our economies and ensure there's that match between the skills that we're developing in our education system vis-a-vis what is required in the job market. Now, in terms of sectors, my recommendation would be, let's start from a familiar terrain. And the familiar terrain here are the sectors where we already have comparative advantage. Like I did mention earlier, arable land is still the largest in Africa. We have young, energetic men who have high potential to be able to contribute to economic activities. We have natural resources. And like I said earlier, the focus should be how do we beneficiate? How do we add value, to some of these activities? So the starting point would be to say, let's look inward at those sectors where we already have some potentials and think about these potentials, how do we harness them? And not just exporting some of these, commodities we have, whether it is natural resources, whether it is crude oil, whether it is minerals in their raw form. I'm sure a number of global electric vehicle manufacturing companies go to Congo and they just take away those minerals, export them, and they go and add value to it somewhere else, creating jobs for those people. And in turn, they come back, we then re-import those, commodities after value had been added. So let's think about engaging these global institutions, these global firms, businesses who are working in this area to say, we need to start from the point of adding value to what we have. For me, that is the easiest way. I know some other colleagues also talked earlier about manufacturing and industrialization, then services. So the process will be start from what you have, which is the natural resources, and then begin to move gradually to industrialization, manufacturing, then go from there to value-added services. That would be a good trajectory, and that's what we have seen in a number of the example of countries who have succeeded in achieving economic diversification.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you so much. So I will ask Anson to respond to the second question that was in the chat. I don't know if Raki, you can read it again, or if Anson, you're fine, you can respond, please.
Oh, sorry. I can, yes, let me translate the question in English. Which strategies, sorry, someone wants to speak? Okay, which strategies that can be put in place with AfDB in order to have adequate infrastructure in place and ensure that we have an efficient economic diversification? And he was referring to Cameroon, actually.
If you don't mind, I can address that question. Would that be okay? Okay, so thank you so much. Donc, I think the question was in French, and it was from Monsieur Zambou. Donc, Monsieur Zambou, je pense que si je résume votre question, vous voulez savoir quelle stratégie la Banque africaine de développement peut mettre en place en synergie avec la stratégie nationale de développement du Cameroun pour pouvoir, au fait, assurer la mise en place des différentes infrastructures nécessaires pour une plus grande diversification économique au Cameroun. Vous savez, tout d'abord, pour commencer, ce que je vais dire, c'est que quoi? Au niveau de la Banque africaine de développement, nous intervenons. J'espère que vous m'entendez. OK, je pense que vous m'entendez. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we do.
OK, parfait, merci. Donc, au niveau de la BAD, nous intervenons, disons, à deux niveaux. Tout d'abord, au niveau souverain, qui passe à travers, disons, nos différents engagements et interventions avec le gouvernement du Cameroun. Et puis aussi, on a une feuille de route qu'on appelle la stratégie pays qui étale, disons, quelles sont les différentes zones ou bien quels sont les différents secteurs ou les différentes priorités au Cameroun sur lesquelles la BAD, en consultation bien évidemment avec le gouvernement camerounais, voudrait intervenir. Et tout ceci en vue non seulement de permettre un meilleur développement du Cameroun, mais aussi, dans la plupart des cas, d'assurer une meilleure diversification de son économie. Donc, en faisant cela, on identifie des zones de priorité au niveau sectoriel, au niveau des réformes qui sont financées par les opérations de la banque. Ça, c'est au niveau souverain. Maintenant, si je viens au niveau des opérations non souveraines, qui est le secteur privé, ce que nous faisons, c'est que nous travaillons en étroite collaboration, non seulement avec le pays, en tenant compte des priorités, que ce soit infrastructure ou tout autre type de priorités du pays, bien évidemment dans le cadre de son objectif de développement pour pouvoir identifier les projets que nous voulons financer. Donc, un exemple que je peux vous donner par exemple dans le secteur de l'infrastructure, surtout au niveau de l'énergie, je suis sûr que vous êtes au courant du projet Nachigal, qui est une centrale énergétique avec une capacité de 420 MW. C'est l'un des projets phares que la banque a financé au Cameroun. Et ceci, d'une manière explicite, contribue, disons, à la diversification économique du Cameroun parce que quand on voit les secteurs où il y a du potentiel, c'est dans l'agro-industrie, par exemple, que vous avez mentionné. Donc, pour pouvoir installer des industries manufacturières à travers toutes, disons, les différentes chaînes de valeur, il faut de l'énergie. Donc, ça, c'est un exemple que je vous montre là. Mais pour résumer d'une manière globale, nos interventions, disons, ou bien nos stratégies d'intervention sont vraiment faites sur mesure par rapport aux besoins et par rapport aux objectifs de développement de tous ces pays. Et en plus de ça, la banque aussi, au sein de la BAD, nous avons 5 domaines de priorité d'intervention qu'on appelle les High Five. Et ça parcourt vraiment tous les secteurs qui contribuent au développement économique de tous les pays de l'Afrique. Donc, nos interventions et nos stratégies sont informées par ces priorités-là, y compris celles, disons, de la stratégie de développement du pays en question. Donc, je pense que ça peut résumer grosso modo notre façon de travailler du côté souverain et du côté non souverain qui se complètent pour pouvoir donner le meilleur de la Banque africaine de développement en termes de support à tous les pays, y compris le Cameroun. Merci.
Merci Boris. Je vais proposer que la troisième question dans le chat soit répondue par Habib, parce qu'il avait déjà commencé en répondant à mes questions. C'est la question de Hugues, si je me Hugues Kelly Codé, qui demande est-ce que l'entrée en vigueur effective de la ZLECA ne peut pas contribuer à une plus grande diversification des économies africaines. Je pense que c'est ce que vous aviez dit, Habib. Si vous pouviez rapidement élaborer là-dessus. La prochaine, je sais qu'il y a quelqu'un aussi qui voulait lever la main. On lui donnera après Habib. Ça sera cette personne. Il y a une quatrième question de Ladji Dosso. Merci, Habib. Over to you.
Oui, bien sûr, la ZLECA ne peut être qu'avantageuse et contribuer au développement de la diversification. Aujourd'hui, quand tu quittes la Mauritanie pour aller au Sénégal, tu passes 2 heures, 2 heures et demie de temps au niveau de la frontière et tu payes de chaque côté. Alors que pendant ce temps, quelqu'un qui veut faire Nouakchott-Las Palmas, il est déjà arrivé en 1 h 30. Ce n'est pas normal. Aujourd'hui, quand un investisseur mauritanien n'est pas compétitif par rapport à un investisseur européen ou asiatique qui a à des dizaines de milliers de kilomètres, parce que en important les matières premières, il est taxé, et en faisant entrer son produit au niveau de notre pays africain, il est encore taxé. Donc, il y a une double taxation qui fait que les tarifs sont très élevés. Donc, cette zone de libre-échange-là ne peut être que bénéfique et ne peut qu'augmenter, comme je disais, diversification, oui, mais en créant des champions africains, par exemple le Mauritanien, je donne l'exemple du cuir, qui produirait du cuir, pourra librement amener ça au Lesotho, au Sénégal ou ailleurs à des tarifs avantageux. Et ça permettra de développer un marché. Si je devais seulement me cantonner à la Mauritanie, j'aurais une population de 5 millions ou une clientèle de 5 millions d'habitants. Alors que si c'est ouvert à toute l'Afrique, si je suis ouvert à toute l'Afrique, j'ai une population de 1 milliard, une clientèle de 1 milliard 300 millions de personnes. Donc, ça ne peut être qu'avantageux, le fait d'ouvrir les frontières, ça ne peut être qu'avantageux pour l'Afrique. Et encore une fois, ça fait plusieurs années qu'on en parle. La volonté, il faut qu'elle soit là et il faut vraiment qu'on mette en pratique tous ces mécanismes ou toutes ces structures-là dont on parle. Voilà.
Merci. La répétition est pédagogique. Effectivement, vous en aviez parlé dans votre réponse antérieure. Je pense qu'il y a une main levée que moi, je ne vois pas. Raki?
Effectivement, nous avons Madame Binta qui est en ligne, qui a levé la main. Je pense qu'on peut lui laisser poser sa question.
Oui, effectivement.
Si elle nous
Merci.
entend.
Merci.
Merci. Madame Binta Ndiaye, est-ce que vous nous entendez? Tania, est-ce que tu peux la unmute?
Ah,
Sinon, nous
excusez-moi, c'est une ancienne, mais excusez-moi.
Ah,
Merci.
c'est une ancienne main, d'accord.
Ouais,
Parfait.
merci.
Donc, on va
D'accord.
passer à la prochaine.
Nous avons une autre personne en ligne. Hein. Je ne sais pas si vous voyez,
pardon.
Madame Binta.
Non, je ne
Monsieur
vois pas.
Monsieur Marcel Zamboun Goumé.
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Allô, vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend, monsieur.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je tiens encore à vous remercier. Je suis monsieur Zambongouné Marcel, économiste et expert planification, suivi, évaluation. Je suis très ravi de prendre part à ce forum, à cette plateforme. Dans les années antérieures, je l'ai fait en présidentiel, mais au regard du contexte lié un peu à des contraintes financières, j'ai préféré vous suivre en ligne. Et je remercie déjà monsieur Habib pour les éléments de réponse qu'il a donnés concernant la stratégie, la synergie qui est mise en place avec la BAD pour pouvoir accompagner le développement structurel de l'économie camerounaise. Et en faisant référence au barrage de Lompanga, qui véritablement va donner un coup de pouce pour pouvoir impulser les industries manufacturières que nous avons besoin, que ce soit dans le domaine de l'agroalimentaire, que ce soit dans le domaine de la transformation du bois, que ce soit dans le domaine du textile. Bon, maintenant, véritablement, j'avais une autre préoccupation. Celle-là porte sur la mobilisation des ressources. Il est bien beau parce que nous allons développer des projets, des programmes pour pouvoir impulser le développement. Mais pour pouvoir le faire, nous avons besoin de la ressource financière. Et nous savons très bien que ce soit la ressource extérieure, l'aide ou bien les subventions venant de l'extérieur n'a jamais permis véritablement à impulser le développement d'un État. Voilà, ma question est de savoir quelle stratégie mettre en place pour mobiliser davantage la ressource financière à l'intérieur pour pouvoir impulser les grands chantiers qui est les nôtres. Voilà ma préoccupation et je vous remercie de vos éléments de réponse.
Merci, monsieur Marcel, c'est bien compris. Je pense que cette question, naturellement, va à Boris. Donc, voilà, over to you.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Don't worry, there's a question for you coming, so you respond. Okay, Boris, over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Zombo, donc, concernant la question de la mobilisation des ressources, il y a la Banque africaine de développement, disons, a pris un certain nombre d'actions, mais non seulement des actions aussi, mais au cœur de notre stratégie de développement du secteur financier se trouve la mobilisation des ressources. Maintenant, ça passe par plusieurs canevas. Tout d'abord, au niveau de la banque elle-même, en tant qu'institution de développement et en tant que la première banque de l'Afrique, quand il y a par exemple des projets ou des besoins de financement dans tous les pays de l'Afrique, notre intervention dans le projet en lui-même est déjà, comment je peux le dire, pour un manque d'une bonne expression, est déjà un panacéa pour mobiliser des ressources. Parce qu'avec notre profil dans le projet, on arrive à mobiliser d'autres ressources, que ce soit de l'extérieur ou de l'intérieur de l'Afrique. Ça, c'est d'abord un point. Le second point aussi qui est très important aussi, disons, à souligner, est que quoi? À travers notre stratégie de développement du secteur financier, et se trouve au cœur de cette stratégie le renforcement ou le développement des marchés financiers régionaux et aussi locaux. Et je pense que un très bon exemple là, auquel vous devez être familier, c'est la récente, disons, intervention de la banque pour pouvoir booster, disons, le marché boursier dans la région de l'Afrique centrale, y compris le Cameroun. Et si je ne me trompe pas, hein, je pense que c'est basé au Cameroun d'ailleurs. Donc, tous ces efforts-là, c'est vraiment pour pouvoir mobiliser des ressources locales et régionales. Troisièmement aussi, si par exemple on prend la plupart des fonds de pension africains ou la plupart des compagnies d'assurance et toute institution qui ressemble, à ces deux institutions, et très souvent elles ont beaucoup de ressources inutilisables qui peuvent être utilisées pour financer, les différents besoins d'infrastructures en Afrique. Donc, qu'est-ce que la banque est en train de faire? Nous sommes en train, de sensibiliser les réformes dans les pays pour que quoi? Ces ressources puissent être libérées pour aller dans ces projets. Donc, il y a plusieurs canevas qu'on utilise pour pouvoir mobiliser des ressources dans les projets d'infrastructure, bien que le niveau de modulation dont on souhaiterait, on ne l'a pas encore atteint, mais c'est un travail qui est en pleine progression et je pense que les fruits se sont déjà matérialisés. Parce que si, par exemple, je donne un exemple très simple, hein, qui n'est pas souvent visible à la plupart des gens, un des moyens que la Banque africaine de développement prend, par exemple, pour pouvoir financer des projets, c'est à travers les prises de participation, globalement connues sur ce qu'on appelle Private Equity Fund. Donc, qu'est-ce que nous faisons, par exemple? On identifie, disons, des fonds qui ont cette capacité de pouvoir identifier des projets ou des compagnies et y mettre du capital dedans. Donc, en injectant une partie de ce capital-là dans ces fonds-là vont par la suite, disons, mobiliser d'autres ressources pour pouvoir les mettre dans ces projets. Et une des croissances que nous avons remarquées dans les dernières années est la mobilisation des ressources auprès des fonds de pension africains, que ce soit par exemple au Nigeria et même compris, disons, au Cameroun, chez vous, la CNPS. La CNPS est en train d'investir dans certains fonds dans lesquels se trouve la Banque africaine de développement et ces fonds, par la suite, vont financer des projets. Donc, ce sont vraiment, disons, c'est vraiment toute une panoplie de stratégies ou d'actions qui sont prises par la banque, qui globalement, quand on les met ensemble, vraiment, je pense, donnent une meilleure approche à l'amélioration des ressources, surtout locales. Et il y a encore d'autres qui sont en cours, hein, à travers notre, par exemple, département de syndication, qui aussi, à travers, disons, l'utilisation des instruments dont on détient, mobilise d'autres ressources, disons, à grande échelle pour pouvoir, par exemple, financer des projets en Afrique. Donc, je vais m'arrêter là.
Merci, merci Boris pour le détail de l'ensemble de ce que la banque fait, des possibilités. Raki, il y a une quatrième ou cinquième, d'ailleurs, je perds le compte. Une question dans le chat de Ladji Dosso qui demande quelle est la place de l'intégration des jeunes évaluateurs dans le système employabilité de la banque pour l'évaluation. Donc, c'est je pense que la question va aller à Hanson. Ça semble être quelqu'un qui est un jeune évaluateur et qui veut savoir comment les capacités en évaluation des jeunes Africains peuvent être valorisées au sein de IDEV. Over to you, Hanson.
Thank you so much. I will attempt to answer, though I think Jane is here. This is her area, so she can probably add more, aspects to it. Yeah, so I think for me, I may look quite young, but I've been in this area for some time now, so I don't think I qualify anymore. But I think what we are seeing is that there are quite a number of avenues, that can be used to empower young evaluators. And I think our colleagues in IDEV3 have a number of platforms through which they utilize that particular angle, working with the national evaluation associations. And we think this is an opportunity because then students can be engaged at student level, young professional level, and then also in different dimensions. But one of the practical ways I think that we are looking at it also from the IDEV perspective is to work more with national evaluation associations. And as we are here currently, there's actually an event in Tanzania where it's a meeting looking at evaluation from different aspects within Tanzania, and the bank did one evaluation in that dimension. In this one, we worked closely with the country's evaluation department, and they have actually a couple of young evaluators in that particular system who were given specific roles of how they could probably support certain functions, because we know at a young stage it begins with certain smaller functions, maybe participating in data collection, data analysis, and then they can develop along the chain as they move along. But I think we also recognize that there's quite a pool of very advanced, a young pool of Africans who enter the bank through the young professional program. And whenever we have these in the bank, we actually work with them quite, a lot. So even in our evaluation, we worked with Miguel. So Miguel is one of the young professionals who has worked with us on the evaluation of economic diversification. And it was very useful actually if you look at the input he brought and the energy he brought to the team. So these are some of the examples that we can look at. But I think, Jackie, to be fair, let Jane maybe add a few aspects on this issue in a more specific way.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Anson, for putting me on the spot. Yes, within my division, actually, that is also a portfolio that we do manage. But as Anson rightly pointed out, in regard to the bank, I can see the two opportunities. As Anson pointed out, through the Young Professional Program, the YPs, but also directly in regard to IDEV, we work closely or collaborate with the national evaluation associations. So that will be the VOPs. So that will be the first point of entry, I would say, or contact for the YEs or the young and emerging evaluators. We work closely with the VOPs in ensuring that, there are opportunities out there, whether it's capacity building, capacity development workshops that they need to attend, or other engagements where our other development partners, they may have, we ensure that, we make that connection. So by working with other development partners and 4Ps, we try to create those opportunities to happen. So it may not be very specific. So what I'd advise the individual who asked the question, please start with your National Evaluation Association. From there, you can also contact AFRIA, because they also have an umbrella that is just focused for the young and emerging evaluators. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. There is also one gentleman on the chat, Darrell Irving. He's introducing himself, and I think that Darrell, the IDEV team, will have your contacts that you have shared, but I think Jane and Anson have provided ways in which collaboration can happen with young or not young evaluators on the continent. So I think that their responses also apply to you and for your introduction. So je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres questions dans le chat ou des mains levées. Raki, surtout les mains levées, je ne vois pas.
Nous avons effectivement d'autres questions dans le chat qui étaient en attente. Je peux en poser une qui serait peut-être adressée à Monsieur Habib et Monsieur Boris, qui serait: quelles sont les stratégies à mettre en place pour mobiliser les ressources financières internes pour assurer la diversification économique africaine? La deuxième, c'est vrai que j'aurais pu la diriger directement vers Hanson, puisqu'il avait commencé à répondre. C'est how our good evaluation practices promoted in Africa. Merci.
Raki, la première question, elle est pour Boris, mais j'ai l'impression qu'il a déjà répondu, non? Ou c'est une nouvelle question?
Oui.
Je peux la diriger aussi pour Monsieur Habib Touré, pour parler peut-être de la mobilisation des ressources financières internes en Mauritanie, par exemple, un exemple.
Bon, comme l'a dit Aïssa, je pense que Boris a répondu par rapport à la question d'ordre général, mais au niveau de la Mauritanie, c'est le problème que j'ai posé. En interne, on n'a aucune autre alternative à part les banques locales. Et aujourd'hui, malheureusement, les hommes d'affaires, ou en tout cas ceux qui sont détenteurs de liquidités pour financer l'activité de l'économie, préfèrent se réfugier la plupart du temps dans l'immobilier. Et on sait tous qu'aujourd'hui, l'immobilier n'a pas une forte valeur ajoutée pour le développement, en tout cas, du secteur de l'industrie ou le développement économique du pays. C'est de la thésaurisation qu'ils font. Maintenant, ils font appel malheureusement aux banques, mais qui ne réagissent pas à cause des différents points que j'ai abordés précédemment, le manque de garantie, le manque de financement à long terme, parce qu'aujourd'hui, toutes les banques ne financent qu'à court ou moyen terme, et même les lignes de crédit qui sont données à ces banques-là ne permettent pas de vraiment financer l'économie. Voilà. Donc, en interne, pas de solution. Et on n'a pas aussi comment dire, de marché boursier au niveau de la Mauritanie. Et c'est ce qui handicape encore plus le développement, le financement en interne. Voilà.
Merci, Habib. Raki, la deuxième question peut aller à Hanson.
But I have another one that maybe I will request Anson to answer. It's for Eric and Anson, actually. It's economic diversification versus countries in fragile situation. Could you suggest development models, some component or framework that countries in fragile situation, such as those in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, or part of the DRC, can adopt to fully exploit their potential and advance their economic diversification? So it's for Eric and Anson. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So I think this is an interesting question, and also as part of our evaluation, we took a deliberate approach to ensure that when selecting the countries for case studies, we include countries in fragile situations, and I think we had Niger in those particular aspects. Now we know that also tied to the growing impact of climate change, and that also is complicating the situation even further. And you see Niger is much more reliant on minerals, and they're trying to grow the agricultural sector as one of the pillars of transforming their economy. And it's quite an interesting dynamic. So there are quite a lot of investments that the bank has helped Niger with in terms of ensuring water adequacy and those other aspects of resources to mitigate the risks. And that would enable now the country to at least develop its agricultural sector. This is from two dimensions. I think the food security angle, but also directly trying to address the issue of food imports. So that also helps them with the foreign exchange and those other dimensions. Within the agro aspects, as you've noticed also, because some of the products have to be imported, especially the finished ones. There's that space now for value addition where a lot of things can happen. But I think also we see that these countries are also quite strong in terms of the leather industry, maybe from the small livestock sector. I think as we heard also from the example of Mauritania, these are areas I think where a lot can be done to see how we can harness that potential in terms of the leather and the tannery industry. So these areas could actually bring up a lot of opportunities in those aspects. For DRC is also another interesting situation because they have a lot of resources and I think there it's also looking at it from a multifaceted approach. So we see that obviously in the two countries there are security issues, but also the issue of the political dimension in terms of continuity and all those other factors. But I think as we've seen also within the DRC, there are some positives that are happening now around DRC, Angola, and Zambia, where a lot is happening now to move especially from cobalt into battery making. And as you notice also, I think the first cargo, I think shipment of, is it copper, was loaded, you know, from DRC through Angola, Robito. So these are things that are happening already, and the bank has hands in all these investments that you hear about. So we can see those areas are actually playing their part. And also DRC has taken a very big step with one of the programs the bank has, which is the TAT, the Technology for Agriculture, you know, programs. And in this program, they are actually advancing agricultural production. If you look at the cassava aspect, DRC is one of the countries that has passed, you know, a policy that 10% of the flour for bread making has to include cassava. And that has a ripple effect along the cassava value chain in terms of processing to add into those particular dimensions. But also, you know, there are different dimensions, as we mentioned, the cultural aspects, you know, the arts that can be harnessed and those different areas as well. So I think the potential is there. The risks are there, but also the potential is there. But definitely it's a much more challenging situation for these countries. They may need a lot more development aid support, because even the attracting private investment is a bit more challenging in this context as well. Yeah, thank you.
Merci. Raki?
Maybe we can ask if someone in the audience would like to ask a question. It's still time. So, si vous avez une question, n'hésitez pas également à lever la main. There is a question that I can ask to Jane to talk about, to maybe talk again about capacity building for national evaluation system. Do we provide that at IDEV, and how people can be aware of that? Thank you.
Yeah, in regard to the evaluation capacity development, the portfolio that we do manage right now, it's not only at the individual level, it's also at the institutional level, and also fostering that enabling environment. So having said that, you know, but the period of 2014 to 2018, we did support Ethiopia and Tanzania in strengthening, not building, strengthening the national evaluation system. And of course, with the support from the Finnish government. However, you know, with that kind of support, it has evolved. Now we are working together with an initiative called Twendembele. And here is a group of 6 countries that have come together to provide that peer-to-peer support, sort of like South-South learning that is happening. So here countries are at maybe more or less similar level of the national evaluation system, so they're able to learn from each other. So we are part of that partnership. So here is one entry that one could see how, I don't know which the question is coming from, which country. Maybe it's one of the countries. You know, we have Niger, South Africa there. We have Benin. We have, I'm sure I'm forgetting some other countries. Kenya is also one. So if you think, if your country is already part of this initiative, this is one way to go. But if it's not, we have more information on our website. It's called Twendembele. In Swahili, translation means going forward. So these countries have come together, you know, in seeing how they can move forward in strengthening their national evaluation systems. Okay, so you can get more information on our website on that particular initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. I think that we do not have any other question, Aissa, so I'm giving you the floor. Thank you.
There is no, thank you, Jane and Raki, but there is Madike Nyang in the chat was asking if IDEV is available or ready to provide webinars to capacity building in favor for national evaluation associations. And I guess that, Jane, you have responded to that. It's in the chats, but as you said, information are available on the website, IDEV website. So I think I have a problem with my, okay, this is back. So I think we are getting to the, yes, we are 2 minutes to the end of the session. Je pense que on a fait un excellent travail d'interaction, en commençant par la présentation de Eric, les interactions avec nos 3 brillants panélistes. Et ce que je retiens, Raki m'a dit 3 takeaways. Ça va être difficile parce que c'était vraiment énormément de choses qui ont été discutées. Je pense que le premier constat que j'ai fait, c'est l'unanimité du diagnostic de la situation de l'évaluation, enfin, de la diversification économique sur le continent. Je pense que tout le monde dit la même chose en renforçant la présentation de Eric. Donc, je pense que là, c'est le premier constat que je fais. Et le fait aussi que malgré cette situation, ce constat qui est un peu, comme je disais au début, un peu déprimant, en tant qu'Africain, on peut être que déprimé de voir ça, surtout sur le long terme, 25 ans, 30 ans. Il y a quand même des bright spots. Il y a des pays qui ont des approches assez intéressantes, malheureusement pas à une échelle où on peut voir le curseur bouger et amorcer une vraie transformation économique, socio-économique du continent de manière durable et inclusive. Donc, je pense que ça, c'est le premier constat. Ce qui veut dire que maintenant, c'est dans la mise en œuvre, dans la création des conditions pour que cette dynamique de diversification économique puisse prendre forme. Et en commençant par le besoin d'avoir des politiques et des stratégies d'industrialisation et de diversification économique. Je pense que Eric l'a dit, il n'y a pas beaucoup de pays sur le continent qui l'ont. Et ça, je pense que c'est la première démarche, parce que ça prouve et ça démontre la volonté politique de vouloir changer les choses de ce point de vue-là. Donc, créer le cadre pour un framework pour que ça puisse prendre place et de manière intégrée, parce qu'on a vu, c'est plusieurs dimensions qui sont en jeu. Le besoin d'avoir un autre takeaway, c'est les infrastructures qui sont vraiment des investissements structurants qui sont nécessaires. Sans les infrastructures, je pense que Habib a beaucoup insisté là-dessus, on peut même dire l'eau, l'électricité, le transport, tout ce qui est digital, on n'ira pas très loin dans cette volonté parce qu'il faut pouvoir décloisonner les marchés, décloisonner les pays. Et ça, je pense que c'est une des conditions. Et ne pas avoir aussi, je pense qu'Eric l'a dit, des approches isolées. Dans le cas du Rwanda, on voit par exemple des projets de 200 millions pour des routes. Et en fait, on ne compte que des outputs, le nombre de kilomètres de route. Et ça fait quand même des retours sur investissement qui ne sont pas très optimums, si on peut dire. Le troisième, et que j'ai beaucoup aimé, c'est le takeaway, c'est celui d'Eric encore, sur de quelle expertise on a besoin sur le continent, dans quel secteur. Et je pense que partant des secteurs du futur, en se projetant sur ce que d'autres pays ont fait et en le combinant avec ce qu'Habib dit, qu'est-ce qu'on qu'est-ce qu'on importe, qu'on pourrait internaliser sur le continent, doit permettre de voir de quelle expertise on a besoin pour pouvoir aligner les besoins du marché de l'emploi et ce que l'offre. On a encore des systèmes vraiment complètement déphasés par rapport aux besoins. Et surtout si on se projette sur le futur, c'est encore plus problématique et il est question de vraiment de changer le paradigme sur la formation. Ce qui pourrait nous amener à démystifier les Bac plus 20 comme on a sur le continent, surtout pour les pays francophones qui ne servent à rien du tout, en tout cas à très très peu. Donc dans des secteurs comme les industries créatives, les industries du sport, les industries du maïs, tout ce qui est meeting, organisation d'événements internationaux. Le Rwanda en a fait une stratégie, un focus. Ils sont passés de la 12e place il y a 5 ans, ils sont numéro 2 maintenant. Tous les grands événements du monde s'organisent au Rwanda. Il n'y a pas un mois ou une semaine où quelque chose ne se passe pas, où il y a 5000 personnes, 7000 personnes ou voire 10 000 personnes. Il y a la question aussi du secteur privé et de son financement. On a essayé de challenger Boris. La banque fait beaucoup. Les besoins sont énormes. Je pense qu'on a besoin de créer plus d'institutions qui nous permettent de changer le narratif au niveau pardon, de là où les besoins de financement sont essentiellement au niveau des SMEs, des petites et moyennes entreprises, parce que c'est ça, là où le segment le plus important sur le continent. C'est bien d'avoir des PPP de 40-50 millions, mais il n'y a pas beaucoup de uptake pour cela. Donc, il faut vraiment qu'on soit un peu plus innovant, qu'on apprenne de ce qu'on a fait. On a fait de très bonnes choses. Il faut 20 AFAWA pour pouvoir, et avoir des programmes d'accélérateurs pour qu'on ait l'échelle qu'il faut pour l'accès au financement pour les SMEs du continent. Je voulais vraiment, bon, ça c'est de mon, enfin, je prends la liberté en tant que modératrice, j'ai dit à part Habib, personne n'a parlé de la dimension du genre. Avec 51% des femmes sur le continent, on ne peut rien faire sans nous. Donc, tout ce qu'on fait, il faut que... ça veut dire que déjà, le peu qu'on ne fait pas, on est en train de subsidize l'économie de nos pays. Et vraiment, à l'échelle politique, à l'échelle investissement, à toutes les échelles, formation, je pense qu'il est très, très important. Et c'est pour ça que quand on dit gender mainstreaming, moi, ça mérite, parce que ce n'est pas du mainstreaming, ça doit être un focus. Donc voilà, en tout cas, j'ai eu beaucoup de plaisir à modérer cette session. Pour l'anecdote, je n'ai pas dormi la nuit tellement j'étais nerveuse, mais ça s'est très bien passé en fin de compte, de mon point de vue. En tout cas, merci beaucoup pour la confiance de IDEV. J'ai beaucoup apprécié d'avoir interagi avec Boris, Eric, Habib, Jane, Raki et Hanson. Ça a été un vrai plaisir et j'ai beaucoup appris. Over to you, Jane. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, what can I say? This was a really rich and insightful discussion. And I have to say, Professor Eric just set the right tone for all of us to have this meaningful discussion. So many thanks to Aisa, Toure, and all the panelists, Anson, Boris, and Mr. Habib Toure. Just by coincidence, actually, we had 2 Toures. What are the chances of that happening at the same time? Not related. So, but this was really insightful. So in conclusion, I think I may do injustice trying to summarize, because Aisa did a very good job. Very good job. So you didn't need to be nervous. Okay, but for me, just the overall, in terms of the discussion, really highlighted the need of building strong partnerships, especially, engaging the private sector and advancing the infrastructure development as important drivers of that regional integration and green growth that is so much needed. So the shared experience from both the public and the private sectors will certainly shape the future initiatives aimed at enhancing, the effectiveness of development programs across the continent. So that is just the big overview that I take away from this particular discussion. Thank you once again to the panelists and the moderator. So the program resumes this afternoon at 2 p.m. GMT with a session that is focusing on environmental and climate challenges. For our online participants, once again, before signing off, please take a brief survey so you can help us enhance our future events. Thank you once again, and see you this afternoon.
Thank you, Jane. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.
Ali. Merci, Moïse. Merci, Eric. Merci, Anson.
Merci beaucoup, Aïssa.
Merci, Raki.
Good to see you, Aisha. Take care. Yeah.